Yeah.
This is math. That's exciting. Is this out of 100? Sorry.
Sure.
Scores?
Is this out of 100?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's exciting, but this is devastating.
But the jump is what really Yep.
Oh, I see.
So
Okay.
it's,
So
so
there's
this
10
is
points.
between before they started Vision 2020 and then the next year after we had done Vision 2020.
Oh.
So that's what this one is showing.
So this is, yeah, that's really great.
Yes, so they're showing the jump between each year.
Okay. But the math score jumped considerably more than the ELA scores. And so for me, on one hand, that's exciting. I know it's supposed to be quiet, but I have to process. But what makes me sad is, and what I've been saying is from an education perspective is we're doing all of this, but if you can't read, you can't do this, you know, and effectively. So that's what's kind of worrisome to me, but I love that the math scores.
I think when you were talking earlier about your original vision statement changing, when I bias to it,
Yeah.
because for me, what you just said about we can't read, we can't do this, I feel like we are getting the social emotional skills that we can't do it.
No, you're absolutely right.
And we're so focused on honesty that it's going to be directly connected to academics is my assumption. I hope that I'm surprised when I see something around data.
Yeah.
And social skills.
Yeah.
These are our tools to measure.
Yeah. And I love that you say that because I feel like so I come back to that because I was a Montessori kid, like I'm not trained in Montessori, but I was one. And so like I feel like incorporating that, like that's why I love your perspective because I think that's what you do. And I don't feel like outside of that, even though those things, it is all about data. And that's the thing, for me, I'm not big on numbers. I know that they're important, but I also, based on the history of how data has been used against people of color and communities of color, like, it's not the thing that I live in. And so for that to be something that is of the utmost importance, when we know that it has never been in the space that I support, communities of color, it still makes me feel a certain way. You know what I mean? Even when we talk about healthcare data and stuff, you know? Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. They're working exactly the way that they were set up to work.
We're getting away from
No, too. I'll find somebody else. Don't worry.
This is nationwide.
They do it.
This one makes sense. Had it changed which dots being which eyes. It's, I'm sure it has to do with the default Excel. It's similar.
I was getting excited.
So that's Asian, right? The American Indian. American Indian, then it's black. Then it's two more races. Then it's American Indian. Then Hispanic.
No, I understand what you're saying, like, they're not keeping the third graders. And so I wonder what that disruption, how that
What
love
do they,
about that.
what do they attribute to that? Because it's huge. It's almost suspect.
It's like 50 more games. So I think one of the things that was super fun, sorry,
No, because I want to grab the other game too.
it's never one thing. You know this, you've worked in education forever.
Right.
There's no silver bullet.
3 or 4 more minutes.
A bunch of things that the theory is as to why. One was
And we'll leave this up for every day. If you
community
want to come back.
partnership, or what the program is, how you're going to provide them all kinds of stuff. So like the assistant superintendent, Christiana, who's now an assistant. Oh, she was the principal, I'm sorry, over this cohort. She's now an assistant superintendent. She was super strong and had made huge gains every school she had been at. So she was also watching each of these schools' data over the years and helping them disaggregate their data constantly. Not just their academic scores, but looking at how are we implementing this program, how are we implementing it, facility, fidelity, who's being drawn into this work. There was just stuff about like kids were more excited to learn, teachers talking about how excited they were to teach in this new way. Like there's just stuff. So
I mean, it's exciting that these kinds of things can be made. I think it would also be interesting for me to see schools that run with 2020 schools.
I did not do this.
So that's that to me, that comparative data.
Is that the superintendent was saying is this isn't sustainable, right? This was year one that we made huge gains like this. We can't expect next year that we're
To
going
be
make
as
another 20
much of a game.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see when the third graders become fifth graders or sixth
That's the
graders.
whole goal, right? Is that like we give them this foundation and then they're able to grow. We're not playing catch up down the line. Yeah.
What year's this data from?
I think it was 17. Let me see.
So last school year?
No,
2 years.
216.
So the year before preschool promise.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Okay. And that would be part of it.
Well, because none of the preschool promise kids we're not going to see third grade stuff.
Well, yeah, right. If you had future data, that would be awesome. And that would change the future.
Next up, build a time machine.
Right.
Note that in my
If I
first
had-
class survey.
Maybe. And if I had a time machine, it wouldn't be to go forward and get data.
You never know.
Make a lot of money though.
Depends.
Oh, there you go.
But it will be interesting to see the changes over the years
Right.
with the implementation.
Well, this is off the state Department of Education study, right?
This is interesting, right? Because this is one of the state's third grade reading assessments.
But this is off their data portal, right?
And so you will likely be seeing, we have schools here. As a whole, the district does amazing, right? Individual schools have 100% pass rates by the Ohio standards for third grade reading. But then if you go to their third grade reading report cards by the same state of the same children at the same schools.
That's an F.
So this is one of the things as board members or people who are interested in this work is like, how do you, what are we being assessed?
Well, you
How,
can
what is it telling
totally
us?
manipulate that data, right? You can manipulate the report card, and the school's on.
Sure, you can manipulate the report card. The report card doesn't actually measure the same things as third grade reading is measuring. There are political reasons why the report card is pushed out there, but this information nobody ever knows from the state's perspective. There's so many. So when you're looking at data, you can also figure out whose data is this and what is their purpose.
True with any data.
Exactly. Exactly.
Lies to analyze the statistics, right?
Yep. Right. Exactly.
Okay, so as a board member, so when you look at 10.5 didn't meet promotion at Bond Hill, I mean, what is driving that number? Right? I mean, and what happens to those kids? Do they get help back in third grade again, or they just have to do remedial reading?
Yeah. I mean, so again, I think one of the other hard parts.
All right, take about 2 minutes to wrap.
so much of when, and as Colin was saying, so but as you're thinking about all of this individually, there are so many systems already, right? One of them is the situation is have to system. So those 10 kids, by the time we get this back, may not even be at Barn Hill anymore.
Right.
And so trying to find the children is a problem. But then, yes, with those kids by law, they don't actually have to repeat third grade, they just have to repeat third grade reading. So in theory, you could promote them to fourth grade and have them do repeat third grade reading. But whether or not the teacher, based on all of the other assessments, like thinks that child needs to be held back, is not even a question anymore. Like you can't, the teacher's input, the parents' input, whether or not that kid just had a terrible day, whatever. Like those are, they will have to repeat third grade reading, even if they are ready to move on to all of their other subjects. Now, there's also not to say if they're failing third grade reading, they like are ready to move on to other subjects, which leads to all of the other questions around social promotion versus we actually do want to catch them this young and make sure they're not moving on if they actually can't read. But yeah, I mean, there's tons of questions. From a board perspective, like, it's not our job to tell any school what to do here.
Right.
It's our job to ask the administration to report back on what are they doing.
Assignments, administration, right?
So that they're doing something.
Right. Or at least providing more data to understand why.
Yeah, yeah. Or if there's like big, so if we have a lot of schools that share similar demographics, so share similar mobility rates and share similar socioeconomic statuses, and we have some schools that are knocking out of the park, 100% pass rates, and we have other schools that are down at 90%, why? And what could we be doing just within our district to be sharing those best practices?
Well, the other one that's really high on this list is Pleasant Hill.
Oh yeah, and like John P. Parker has a 100% pass rate. Roselawn has a 100% pass rate. Like we have there are a bunch of schools that have 100% pass rates. And again, it's figuring out, is this the data that's valid? Is the AIR data valid? Is some assessment they're doing at the school level? Because they also do map testing, right? I mean, those of us with kids at school know they're doing quarterly map testing. Is that actually more valid because you're seeing their progress multiple times during the year? So it is a question of like, what are we tracking? What's the most valid? And like, what data do we want to add on? There's a lot to think about. But it's important to be asking the questions you all are asking.
I was looking through a lot of this data last year, and you have to take like 5 different tabs and correlate the data together to start to get what you want to get.
To even get a story, right?
Right.
So, yeah. Yeah.
Because this does not really.
And that was regardless of whether you're at 5% of max income or 80%. And typically, once you get to like the absolute upper thresholds, you're not as likely. That precipitously drops every decade to the 80s, so that people are only 40% likely. And look at
It
this.
seems to be like just an overarching.
Yeah.
And then this is absolute mobility. So this is the percentage of children earning more than their parents. So we're down from in the 40s, somewhere above 90%. To overall, even adjusted for taxes, generational wealth transfer, family size, we've dropped almost 20 points.
Would be interesting to see that.
So Raj Shetty, who did this research, is releasing an economic opportunity map October 1st. It will be the New York Times cover.
All right, bring it back.
Except for at CBS.
We're going to spend basically the rest of the day talking about racial inclusion in systems instructions.
All right, bring it back.
Oh, you guys watch this too, I should say. It's in,
That's
so
so
this
funny
is,
that your shoes match your hair.
Thank you.
It's just like too much. Oh yeah, well, yeah, the shoes and the hair, sort of like top and bottom.
Who gets to do that, right?
so you guys know you have a ton of
exactly. So what is that? Like, is there this thing in the Obama effect? And then so as a school board school member, it's about recognizing our role in the systems at work.
We'll start. So I am glad to be here and glad to learn. And appreciate you guys making this possible, all of you. My data insight reflection. I spend a fair amount of time with data and with Strive, so I guess there were fewer surprises or insights around the data, but I am very intrigued with what happens as a result of the data. The so what? And how to effectively address the outages where they exist. Thank you.
I'm okay. Glad to be here, see my cohort. Data, insight, reflection. I was with Marlena and I saw Black people high, and then I was like, oh, they're the lowest. So that was kind of like just an interesting thing of like having a moment of excitement. It's like, all right, the best is something, but the best of being the lowest. So that was kind of like the high moment followed by the low moment. I agree concur with Jasmine around intersectionality and just like disaggregating data. Because I think even AAPI, if you look at which community you're talking about, Vietnamese versus Korean or Japanese, you're going to see very dramatic differences. And even among white people, you see differences based on class. I think another insight I had, I think consistently across the room, that as a fairly well-educated guy that reads a lot of data, this stuff was really hard to understand. And I think a lot about the disconnect between our communities, and we talk about parent engagement, but like, if this is the stuff you have to mine through, I can see why people aren't engaged. And so like, how can we present data in a way that's just a lot? I mean, it was hard for a lot of us, like trying to make sense of it. And we're in school board school. So it just kind of had that humbling moment of like, we're struggling with this, like, of course there are going to be parent engagement issues. So that was another reflection. I think what it means for me is a commitment not only to getting better data and more data, but also translating that in a way that's meaningful for our communities and our parents.
Speaking back to that, one of the things that made it hard to understand was the colors and the icons changed on every single one of those charts.
I'll go. I got a feeling, I know, I got an idea about the data. So thinking, how am I'm better now than I was in my trial. I miss you guys. Trust me, I would prefer to be here than where I was, but I'm here. The data inside, I'll give you a response based on how I've dealt with and managed data in my lifetime. I did a lot of data work for NKU, and we did data for the city of Dayton, Kentucky. I didn't know there was such a place until I moved in this area. And the city wanted to make some improvements, but they were not sure where to put their budget dollars. And the council wanted to do one thing. I think other people wanted to do another thing. So we, as a student body, graduate student whatever it wasn't what they wanted to do. Second, it was like a, what is it called, a split down the middle. They did a little bit of what, they did probably more than half what we proposed, and then they did, the rest of what they wanted to do. And what that does, what does that mean for me? Although it's not education, I learned a very valuable, that was just one experience, but my graduate was all about data. I don't believe numbers. I am an untrusting person of numbers, because what that taught me is that you can make numbers say whatever you want it to say, whatever. And so, because I don't believe it, if you know that we have a problem and over the grind and then you paint all the buildings and say now, the pigeon population is high and you push your campaign and you put all these numbers, but if you go behind the paint and you see homelessness and poverty, you just do the campaign in front and put the numbers up how you want. And I see that to be true for CPS. I don't believe that the numbers, I think that's why they're always asking for data. A, because they don't understand it, they can't comprehend it, and they don't know how to collectively define a solution that addresses the data. So data on one side, solution, correlation to the data. I don't, and then down the middle, be emotionally, intelligently sensitive. I don't have any, especially now that I'm here in a public school. I do not have any confidence that it's enough. I'm not saying everyone, it's enough people to be able to do that. Is that my
I feel really hyper. It's not coffee. It's just this is, I'm super into data and statistics, and then what's driving them, like how do you use the numbers to tell the story, so the narrative. Because I'm looking at these numbers, and the human geographer in me is, okay, so that's my map, but every map tells a story. What is this saying? So for instance, with the college enrollment rates, we're looking at that, and it's, there were some gains in the beginning, and then for every race that was represented on there, it's starting to plateau. And then I'm looking at the years and thinking, okay, well, what's going on there with education policy? What's going on economically? And there's just, like everyone's been saying, you can't just look at the numbers and make any kind of decision. You have to go deeper. And for me as a school board member, that means several things. One of which is, how do we better collaborate with administration to get that narrative out so that it's understood by our stakeholders? And how do we capitalize on the talent pool that we have on the board to kind of make policy to address the narratives behind the numbers?
And I'll ask her just, how are you from the implementation team members?
I'm fascinated just listening to all of you and also impressed by the takeaways that you are having. I will say one of the insight reflection points to also, I would just throw out there in addition to everything that you're already saying, is we put up some of the same data on the same kids that are telling very different stories. And so I think along the lines of what you all are saying, thinking about the why, right? Like this third grade, this is an Ohio State third grade reading assessment. This is showing that at some schools, 100% of kids are passing reading, right? Can pass reading. The same state tests the same kids in the same subject, And as you also saw, many of those schools are failing. That's the data that gets pushed out to the entire world. Hardly anyone sees this. Nobody saw the AIR scores from Vision 2020. So I think as you all are also looking at the data, the questions around why, like who's collecting the data, who's deciding what data points to collect, and who's getting to tell the story of that data, and what's their motivations is also an important thing to be thinking about. So that's also where, as a board member, as a former board member, as school board school, I'm thinking.
Benefits from the
So,
way.
so I'm just gonna hold, just get everybody checked in, and then we'll get into that.
Steph or Marisa, you wanna, yeah.
Just, your name and how you're doing this morning?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm Steph.
Steph?
I'm doing great.
I'm Raisin, I'm doing well too.
Hi, Marisa.
And I'm Colin, I'm doing well, I'm excited about the work ahead, because it sounds like you all are wanting to go where we're gonna go. But before we do that, I'm just gonna leave this up for a minute. So you all are coming together as a cohort, right? You had some similar and some different insights. What themes would you draw from the data that you just heard from your peers?
More data.
More data?
Different.
Different, yeah.
Different?
It looks different. It's not.
More and different?
Yeah.
The story behind the data. So like, what's the narrative?
And the motivations behind showing this specific data.
Who's collecting? We already said.
Mhm.
Who's collecting the
Who's
data?
collecting?
And who do, so the who has to be wide.
Mhm.
What's in the middle?
And the other one I would just name that I heard a lot was intersectionality.
Oh,
Right? So, in a minute, you're actually gonna move, we actually call it, there's a reason we use trend line data, right? Because data, while imperfect, right? If you have a trend line, what you can start to ask is what's the story behind the curve, right? And so, and in a minute you're gonna do that, but I just wanna pause for a moment and ask, like, why look at student learning objective data as a school board?
Well, in theory, as a board member, you're implementing change to provide different insights, and you have to understand, is what you're doing moving the dial you want to move, or are you moving something else as a result? Right? What are the intended and unintended effects, and how effective are they?
as a school board, school member, one of the things I continue to look at is our responsibility to think about equity across the system. And so I'm always looking at like, where are the gaps? Because it's my responsibility to, in the sense of equity, to ensure that the people that need most resources are getting those. So I think that mapping of like, where we're seeing achievement gaps, opportunity gaps is really important.
So I get to work all over the country with school districts. What I often see is people spend a ton of time saying, we're gonna set goals for student learning, right, over the summer. And then we're gonna roll those goals out to building heads, like in August. And then by the time that the first board meeting in November comes, the only thing that's getting reported is budget. Right, and so the management system of a lot of districts is actually set up in a way that the accountability ultimately rests where we prioritize budget over student learning. Right, and so one thing to think about as you all are thinking about this role is as you're developing a management system, right, you're in a governance role, you're in an implementation role, where is the accountability held? And maybe are there multiple points of view around where that accountability is? Because almost every district I've ever worked with, that student learning piece drops immediately off as soon as the public starts coming to board meetings and as soon as people start talking about levies and finances and all that sort of stuff, right? So how can you continue to elevate the equity pieces, the disparities, the student learning outcomes, and not just become a fiduciary board that's managing the budgets?
I'm gonna add one thing, Tom, that is such an important point. So all of the work that you all read around what distinguishes effective boards and board members from those that aren't effective, we're predicated on the idea that an effective board boosts student achievement, right? That is what all of these articles and researches and doctorate theses that I've been shocked as a board member to realize that not all my board members thought our job was student achievement. So I had just been, I was over a year into my role, and I think I had just assumed that that's what we all assumed our role was. And I said this just as a like, well, you know, how does that move our ultimate goal, which is student achievement? And I got pushback from multiple board members that that's not our job, that's across the hall. Right across the hall. The board office is here, across the hall is the administrative office. And I was like, whoa, I was like, what is our job? And it was like finance, and it was policy, and I was saying blah, 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 blah. But if we could have like the best balanced checkbook in the world, but if our finances aren't moving student achievement, then we're not doing our job. We can have great policies that are aligned with state and federal law, but if they're not moving student achievement and closing equity gaps, then like what is our job? And by the time I left 4 years later, I still did not have every board member on board that our job was student achievement. So to Colin's point, I just wanted to like, not put a pin in that, but like put an exclamation mark in that, that you may not be walking into a situation, and everybody believes student achievement is important. Clear, I mean, every one of our board members absolutely knows that that is the goal of the district. They just weren't on the board that that was the goal of a board member. And so that is a really interesting place to kind of have your heads around too, that like some of these battles we didn't even know we were gonna have to fight, you may actually have to have to start at like step one.
So you all are going to have a chance now to move into that piece around the story behind the curve. But I did want to say something about the intersectionality, right? So a couple things. So disaggregated data is critical and not meant to be about reinforcing narratives, right? It's a way to unearth what's happening within systems. The other thing is that groups are not monolithic. Right, so in Seattle, for example, we did a lot of work around exclusionary discipline, and if anybody saw some of the Seattle reports, I've got those for folks to take. So they did a State of Black Students in Seattle report, disaggregated, because the Black student population in Seattle is actually like 72 different countries, I don't know, 30-something different languages. US-born, English-speaking Black students in Seattle face exclusionary discipline in the 9th grade year at 22%. So more than 1 in 5 US-born English-speaking Black students faces exclusionary discipline in the 9th grade year. African-born English-speaking Black students, it's less than 3%. It wasn't until we could give that data back to teachers, administrators, right, to say, what are the differences here? What are the expectations or the mental models that you're actually projecting on students in the way that you perceive similar behaviors in very different ways? Right, so until you can get to that level of understanding what's actually happening in systems, you're not going to be able to get to the specific strategies that are going to actually improve outcomes. And I know you're recording this, and I apologize in advance, because the rising tide lifts all boats is bullshit. It is bullshit. Because, one, some people don't even have boats because our systems have taken them away, and we're just flooding people out of the system. So if you'll forgive me for a moment, because we're going to continue down the racial line, because for me, when you look across any American social outcome, our Black population is disproportionately impacted by the systems that we've created.
Where's the data? Where's the data that proves that?
I just want to name it because we're not. But this is important to name, right? Because I don't want to say this to reinforce narratives. It is not on the population.
Right.
It is on the system.
That's right.
So
even flipping that, like even saying it that way, I think is important because the narrative, like that's not surprising to anybody, but it's the way that it's, you know what I mean? Like the way, especially in Cincinnati. Especially.
And the data that you just shared that was so specific around disciplinary actions, where's that? Like that's the data that's gonna change things, not this.
this data. But frankly, right, it's at the table that I had to bring from other communities.
Yeah, from other communities, exactly.
Because we're not our own. We can't use ourselves to pick ourselves up and change it for ourselves. Not here. For some reason, when we talk, even about ourselves, it's just not real. But when we hire somebody from Seattle to come in and do an assessment and we pay through our budgets, you know, and then you tell us what we already know about ourselves, and you recommend being our mission, then it's like, oh yeah, we'll try that.
Can't be a profit
We'll put
hometown.
water fountains in the hallway.
Can't be profit in your hometown.
Just really briefly, there was something in what we were reading that you and I had a conversation about. That, because I know where you're going, but there's something in what we were reading about effective school boards that hit me the wrong way and kept bothering me. And it was this idea that like getting too far off track from like academic achievement of students. But the way that they talked about discussions around racism and poverty was, it almost made it seem like these conversations are a distraction to academic achievement. And I was like, no, they're actually necessary to understanding academic achievement. And it was reiterated a few different times in that piece about the bullet points of effective school boards. Like, effective school boards like don't get lost in the weeds of like overarching issues like public health and poverty. I'm like, well, actually, like, in my mind, like, those are very important things to have an understanding of, because even when the data that you just gave about US-born African Americans versus, like, I already have a narrative in my mind of like why that might be the case, right? But if someone's saying like that's a distraction, like, you know, we need to just focus on the academic achievement without these systemic conversations around racism, poverty, gender inequity. Even among gender, I notice black boys and black girls very different, right?
So I will name my bias, which is probably slightly incongruous with the reading you have. So I work in this space of collective impact, right? So we say it can't be, you can't solve racial or socioeconomic inequities without focusing on what we call adjacent sectors, right? So I came from transit to this work because if you want to talk about inequities in Cincinnati, right? You got to look at transportation. If you want to work on early grade reading proficiency, you got to work on stable housing, right? So let me introduce this frame because I think it will help to get at what you all are talking about. So this is an incredibly graphically accurate representation of what is a very sad statistic, which is infant mortality across the U.S. So the good news, per 100,000 births, the all birth rate for infant mortality has reduced significantly over the last 15 years. So across all US births, there has been a decrease over the last 15 years. We live in complex systems, right? So there are factors, right, that are pushing this trend line down over time. Thinking about the last 15 or so years, what might be a couple of those factors? I know I'm not asking anyone to be like a child health expert, but what can you imagine would be some of the factors pushing this down?
Access to medical care.
Access to medical care. Maybe one or two more.
The move toward like stopping smoking. So that's
Smoking cessation? Yeah. One more?
Better understanding of things like SIDS.
SID, yeah. Sudden infant death syndrome, better understanding of some of these conditions. So, unfortunately, right, this line is not zero. Because at the same time these factors are pushing this trend line down, there are opposite and often equal forces continuing to push that trend line up. What are some of those? And at this point, I'm just going to ask you for all kids.
Nature.
Nature?
You can't have zero.
So there are natural conditions that impact childbirth. Others?
access to medical care.
That exactly. This one is back and forth. Right? So the sad fact, right, is for our black moms, the rate is also decreasing, but it is twice as high. So what often happens in America is that white dominant institutions program at this level. What we know to be true is to actually eliminate disparities, we have to identify what are the unique factors that our systems present for Black moms? So what might be one or two factors that are actually helping to push the trend line down for Black moms?
So organizations like in Cincinnati, like Creative Cincinnati, who specifically get funds to push that down, like
Yep.
giving down cribs, community education, like on a whole spectrum.
And I'm just gonna unpack it a little bit. So Credit Cincinnati is like the initiative. What's behind that though, the factor is like that specific focus and
Yeah.
intentionality, right?
It may be a little off, but I would say the medical staff themselves, because I think I read somewhere in my lifetime that African American women with advanced degrees in corporate America have the same rate of infant mortality as others. So if that is true, and they're getting prenatal care, and they're getting the same care or getting care as someone who's not, the only difference I can see is the mindset of the person issuing the care that the woman receives.
Yep. Another one here that's been emerging a lot, we've been working a lot on this in Memphis, is doulas, right? So like
Oh, absolutely.
right? So this is a case of like very specific strategies, right? So what are some of the unique factors that are pushing that trend line up for our Black moms?
Access to medical care.
This one will be just like a thread through it.
I think, you know, when I hear about like the providers, I also think about the lack of trust that Black women have in the medical system. So if that trust isn't, it's like a competency on one side and then a lack of trust, probably due to the lack of confidence.
Fewer teen births.
Fewer teen births, pushing up or
Pushing it up.
Fewer?
What does that mean? Tell me more.
So there is a higher mortality for teen births, and that's been going down for all.
So that might actually be one
Driving it down.
driving down, right?
Right, yeah, sorry.
No, you're not.
Driving it up and driving it down.
So the thing here, right, the thing I'm trying to push you to consider is that too often systems do this work. They say, okay, we're gonna look across all kids, for all families, right? And because those people that hold power typically look like me, they're making decisions based on what would support them. As opposed to doing the hard work, right, of actually understanding what is that story behind the curve. So I'm gonna give you all a chance to play with this. And so what I want you to do, and the reason I put disaggregated data in the room, is I want you to take one of these disaggregated trend lines and do what we call a universal factor analysis, right? So for that whole trend line, and then pick a targeted population and do a targeted factor analysis. And so you can do this, you can stay your tables or you can mix up, but we can put your paper on both of these walls. So pick your trend line, take the next 20 minutes and do a universal and targeted.
In two groups, right? Like not
Two
as an
groups.
individual, but two groups. So dividing yourself. Oh, by table? Yeah, by table, yeah, over there and then.
And just so folks know, I'll leave a handout around factor analysis to your table, but the targeted universalism frame comes from John Powell, who was formerly of Ohio State. I have
We should do nation.
this.
That's what I was saying. It's like on one side.
So, in case where
Just because I have like a real filter. Just because the dry erase sometimes don't like that.
It's weird that like not graduating.
So, in the 40s, people, if we look at, if we focus on,
So what is causing graduation to,
But to be more transparent, I wonder if it would be helpful to list the, because it's by race and ethnicity, right? If we were to just percentage, so we can see it more in numbers.
One also looking at this, like, what is graduating on the line? Is that the district for you? Because a lot of research shows that if you take it out to like a 5-year, the graduation rate just like goes so much higher because
I bet it does.
you've got kids who it's like one course, so there's just like summer school credit recovery and they graduate in the summer, but it's not a full year. Or you've got kids who are AMPs that they have that extra time. Or you've got students that, you know, they might need extra time. English, like English and science. So
Okay.
I think if you just have to make so if you look at it, I mean, the one that's the highest is 30% practically of Indian. That's the highest.
Keep going.
And then it's 25 for African Americans. It's like it's 22 for Latino. Mm-hmm. And for is that no, hold on. This is
Non-Hispanic.
right. That's white. Yeah.
Oh, is that total? Is that total?
What color is it?
Oh, so that's
Oh.
what is this and this? So one is non-Hispanic.
API.
No, that's the bottom.
Oh, that's the bottom one?
So
Okay.
this is less than
Yeah.
10%. Like that's like 8% for AAPI.
What's
And
white?
then above this is
Non-Hispanic,
non-
yeah,
that's white.
whites. Yeah, that's white.
This
Yeah,
one's
that's white. White is 12.5.
total.
And then this one is, yeah, that's just the entire group
What's mixed?
is 7. So, no, there's not, they don't disaggregate
Yes,
mix.
it did, you won.
But it's not represented. There's no brown.
Well, that's crazy.
It's just a total.
So total is,
So the total percentage is 17.5. But this is how it breaks down. So I think in this analysis, what he's saying is like, if you look at, and let's say for the case of Cincinnati, since Black students are 70% of CPS, what are the driving factors for this? You mentioned one, it's like if we're looking at it, if the presumption is 4-year graduation rate versus another. My pushback against that is even if it's 5 years, it's going to be the same for each ratio.
The barrier doesn't go away, you just
Right.
gave the barrier
You just-
more time.
You just gave it more time, so the same.
And now it's not.
Because you would also assume that like white students would graduate at higher rates if you gave them.
Everybody's gonna improve.
so do you want to look at a ethnic group or do you want to look at the total?
I think his point is that you don't fix it until you look at the group that's struggling the most and
Yeah.
figure out
Okay,
what's
so let's start with, here.
Yeah.
Sure, well,
I just don't feel like we
Much
have
about
enough
that.
context for.
So let's do
what's
this.
involved. Yeah.
So what would be some of the things that are driving graduation down?
I would say disciplinary policies.
Or improving graduation?
No, our if you look at the over suspension and expulsions.
Didn't it just pass a policy here in Cincinnati? Because it made national news about the number of kindergartners that that were suspended. The number of kindergartners, I was shocked, that were suspended in Ohio, and now they can't suspend. State college. Yeah, now they can't suspend an actual. I never heard. And then the number of kindergartners that were handcuffed and arrested in Ohio. Yes, in Ohio. Mm-hmm. But that is, but hold on, it's crazy, but you're absolutely
absolutely
right.
right.
If my kindergartner spends more time in the back of a police car than he does,
They're not learning.
and his teachers don't have good classroom management skills, and so if he is rambunctious, the solution is suspension. That means he's spending those times where he should be learning out of the classroom, not detention, and it's a kindergartner. And as a kindergartner, you're suspended. So he can't, my kindergartner can't go to first grade with all the other ones who can't read and write in Cincinnati.
I would say, because I think we should get a few more factors. I think you're right here, the discipline. What are some other ones you think are driving the rates to be advanced? I would say generational. Like, kids are more likely to finish high school if their parents, like, I think there's a generational cycle.
That's true. That's true across anything.
It's
Whether
true, like,
yeah, so
right.
that's-
But if you consider that
You're saying parent education level?
right, so if there are more first generation kids among African Americans and other populations, then the likelihood of them graduating or going to college is also going to be a factor.
So
Right,
first gen.
right. And that may be first gen high school, first gen college.
Would you say first gen or just generation? Because even in those generations, in those families that have good or bad success, if it's not consistent, if my parents graduated from high school, but I have a whole family of non-graduates, it's not as, it may not be as impactful, but I do agree with that generation being a factor. I don't know that first generation is as impactful.
Well,
I say technology is a huge
Access to technology.
access to technology is a factor. Yeah.
Yeah, she was flying. We took the red eye last night. But yeah, she was,
So long.
she actually went
It's kind of, what's the word?
okay, so she,
Where,
you know,
where
she went
just,
out there.
they get hit so many times with,
Went to two
students,
express.
consistently underachieve, so they just start believing like, oh, well, they're already not gonna do well, so we're not gonna give them as much attention.
I would say, I think we can say racist mindsets, our lack of cultural,
Ingrained, yeah.
or implicit bias.
so implicit bias.
Because there was even a study that showed that, like, they did a study on teacher perception of students by race, and it was definitely like a mindset that like black students were going to be less likely to.
You know what? This may fall underneath there, but I have to train my son to be, not that he is a threat, but I have to train him to speak in a way that doesn't threaten, that doesn't threaten
Me jumping in. I'm doing factors.
Oh, yeah, this is my.
And we're isolating
Carly was in Madison.
So what I'm saying is, like, for example, along the lines of ingrained thoughts and teachers, right? I think what goes along with that is how a student's perceived, and I say this both male and female. So as a male, I have to train him to keep his voice at a certain level. I have to, you know, he's almost the same as you, and he's 13, and he cannot understand why everybody doesn't see him as ready to move, because that's his part, right? And so I have to train him that you have to have this time, because I believe that administrators and teachers believe the outer man submit, not seeing him for who and what he is. So I don't know that it falls under the bias or more so because a stereotype.
I think it's kind of like, I think we can add stereotypes to it.
I think gender as well, because I think the same is true for the females. So that was an example of male. I think it's true. So if the young lady is, you know, may feel passionate about something, outspoken. So me, if I'm outspoken, she's an angry black female. No, I'm not. I'm a well-spoken, intelligent, articulate African American woman who is passionate about a subject matter. Thank you.
So that would be the way the stereotypes play in.
See, that's what I'm saying. I think it's a little bit, and I think people start treating you according to this, so they give you less of what you need. They give, and I'm going to say they give. They're not earning. They give less of what they need to be successful to graduate.
Is this a U.S. national statistic, or is this
I don't think it's,
CBS?
I don't think it's, yeah.
But it's more about getting the factors.
So we should, just in the interest of time, we should talk about what would need to be true the other way around to shift that. One of the things that's not listed here that I think would be is ECE, like early childhood education. Right, as like, because like students enter so far behind, and there's even a stat that says people are correlating the rate at which to build prisons by second and third grade reading schools.
Absolutely.
So if you're like intentionally like these kids are at this level in third grade, like the way that you reverse that trend is by focusing more efforts on the early childhood.
With the Hispanic project, my first thing goes to ESI.
I would say language.
I mean, they're not going to be able to graduate
We are
because
talking,
they're not.
so we're focusing, we just decided for the sake of this, he asked us to pick one group. But I would agree with you if we were talking about.
I would go within early childhood, just the resources for secondary English learners, because they're not going to be able to graduate, because they're not going to be able to read at that level, which goes into early childhood education.
And I was just saying that like, because we were, you weren't here, like, because we were isolating one group, that I think is absolutely true if we were focusing on.
Well, I don't know if this has been brought up, but one of my professors, he was, in my counseling program, he did presentations on black male youth, the prison pipeline from high school to prison. I don't have a lot of data on it because I hadn't attended one of his presentations, but that's something.
Okay, so
As a mitigating
I'm gonna rudely interrupt just for like 30 seconds, and then I'm gonna get right back to it. So if I can,
that's true,
if I can get everyone's attention real quick, just interrupt for like 30 seconds, and then I'm gonna put you right back to it. But I wanted to now sort of up the ante, right? So hold on. It's gonna be the same task, just let everybody look at it. So who's familiar with? Has anyone ever heard the language of mental models?
Yes.
Right. So what do you know about mental models?
It's like what's behind the behaviors.
Right. Mental models are basically like the stories we tell ourselves about the way things are, why things are the way they are. Right. So factor analysis is a great way to crowdsource people's mental models very quickly. Right. Because probably many people are looking at similar data and drawing very different inferences about what that data means. And this is like a primordial fight or flight instinct we have, right? Because we're constantly sorting like danger, safe, right? So in a split second, people are looking at similar data, they're selecting the data that has meaning for them, they're adding whatever connotations they have based on the lived experiences, right? And then it shows up in whatever you say or feel. So part of the activity with the factor analysis is, right, how do you slow down? This shows up a lot in implicit bias. Right? So how do you like slow down that thought process and really understand like what is maybe just a mental model I hold and what is true? And the key is often you actually need to engage those people that are most impacted or most marginalized by the systems because often they have the true lived experience. So I say all of that just to say, watch your mental models. The second piece, and I'll give you this handout in a minute. Has anyone ever heard of this systems iceberg?
Yes.
Systems iceberg? Okay. What do you know about the systems iceberg?
So it is getting down to those mental models. So with the iceberg, what you see is at the top, you don't know how deep it goes. So what you are seeing is like, that's what you see, and like how do you take what you see, but also look at what are the things that are affecting that and taking the full context?
So, perfect. And I'll give you a quick example, real example. I'm kind of tired today because I took a red eye back from Phoenix this morning, so I landed at 5:15. The pattern is I've been tired more often lately. The structure is I travel 40 weeks a year for work. Out of Cincinnati, that doesn't have the most availability of direct connections, right? The mental model is that work is the most important thing for me as a white male American, and I will do whatever it takes to be successful because that feeds my ego. That gives me my sense of self-worth. I'll give you another example, potentially a darker. So in DC, I was working at DC Public Schools and some of the partners there. So in DC, we said, what is the most wicked, pervasive mental model that people in a community hold about DCPS? And what they said, after kind of really thinking about it, is, you know what, we import all of our talent for DC. Right? We bring in people from great universities all over the country. Right? So the perception is actually that we don't need kids in DC. So DCPS is a holding system. So then how does that show up in the structure? Right? It shows up in how it gets funded. It shows up in how people pay attention to professional development, to things like transportation systems. It shows up in the patterns of, you know, Johnny hasn't shown up the last 3 weeks because he's dealing with a family issue and they have only one car for their family. And that shows up in that Johnny missed school today. So mental models actually set up structures which drive patterns. So when Johnny doesn't show up today, we think, you know, Johnny's family can't get it together, right? The reality is, this is where you make the change. So I want you to go back to your factor analysis and try to go below the surface. Try to get at those things that are maybe under the water. I just trying to show off my
Well, we've got it set up, so they're down there doing stuff, trying to do stuff, but on the, so it's like a big hassle. But,
What do we think the mental models are? Like,
We did the emotional intelligence
like this is
assessment.
a, gonna be a
Lowest score, high score, six.
this is interesting for me, because this is what we do as school counselors, is we look at specifically graduation rates and our demographics, and then try to bridge that gap. I just don't think of it in that sort of structure. I mean, you do, we just don't call it that. So some, like, but it's all factoring, like, like what's going on at home, what the resources are to go to, I mean, looking at it from, like, even the college, going into college, like, which ones are, well, if they're not gonna graduate, then that's a factor, but even factoring into, they take a standardized test, at least by, you know, they've taken a practice ACT probably sophomore year, the ACT junior year. Statistics for the ACT is blacks score lower than the other whites, Asian populations, and other demographics. And if you're getting lower ACT scores than doing well in college, getting into college, getting scholarships, that really impacts scholarships. And if you can't fund to go to college, and then without, well, we're just getting back into vacation, then what do you do? Well, what's the point of going if I don't have any other options? Which you see where CPS is trying to like go where like just schools in general going back to a vocation model, but we're not 100% there because that's factored into a lot of the data as well. It has.
I think that's interesting, because I wonder how many kids that score low on those ACTs go to college and do phenomenal.
It just depends. But well, the thing is how many can go to college because your scholarships, your merit-based scholarships are based upon ACT and GPA. And then there's this huge thing that just happened in Kentucky with Florida colleges, where they're not offering, colleges will not offer remedial math, any remedial classes. So if you're coming in with those low math scores or those low English scores, what you gonna do? I mean, they're supposed to be offering a whole other thing. It's just kind of interesting when you're not meeting those benchmarks at being math proficient and English proficient. you're not going to be able to, unless you're some schools, but in Kentucky, they're not offering it anymore. They're not. That happened, that was part of this year's,
Just
huge, big change.
about a 2-minute warning.
Okay, so can you put that into a
But
mental model?
Right, because I feel like you described a lot of really good stuff, but I feel like it's kind of toward the top of the iceberg, and I think what he's
well,
trying
right,
to push
that's,
us
those
to
are
do is
things, but why they're not getting those ACT scores, they can't afford to get tutoring, they can't afford the $600 classes. And that makes a huge difference, because I've seen my students when they take those classes. So if we can't afford it, then where are the resources?
So the mental model is what?
I definitely have educational resources.
What are you saying?
I don't know about not investing in them. Those resources should be there, but like bridging that gap. But it's looking at
I get that, but I feel like we're still talking about the things we see. He's trying to say, what's the mindset?
Below it.
Okay, the mindset.
And
Mental model.
if it's Kentucky, that's not it.
I just think I think there's systemic and institutional
There's
racism.
that.
Okay, so,
And because if you look at each of these, it points.
so what is racism?
And
So what is the model?
College isn't for everybody. Unpack that into.
It's going back to the white European. I mean,
I think it's that,
But-
and I think this would be true. Like schools where most African American children attend are consistently under resourced,
Funded.
underfunded. It's racial inequity of schools where, if you look at the schools that are doing the best in CPS, they have higher.
So what is the mental model? Like, not our problem?
Black people aren't smart. No offense, that is not what I agree. But I think it's, if you want to get to the heart of it, and poverty.
Somehow they're less than,
I don't know. That's something
We need to target our resources towards
the mental model.
people that we think are going to succeed, and it's about not wasting resources.
Strengthen your strengths, major to majors, minor to
Yeah.
minors kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was very unpolitically correct way.
No,
I
because
think
I think that's the mindset.
I think there is a
of lot of people.
mindset there. And you see that with when you.
Organizational change. But the premise of this is, right, that all of us, regardless of what role we play, we operate within boundaries, right? We have authority that is granted to us in some way, shape, or form. There's a specific role that we play, and there are tasks related to that. So I'm going to use the example of a judge real quick, right? People literally hold in your mind, right? A judge like literally puts on robes to signify that they are taking up a role. So what are some of the boundaries within which a judge operates?
The law.
The law,
Social norms?
social norms,
Courtroom.
courtroom,
Precedent.
ooh, you have precedent. So another couple to think about, this could be geographic or jurisdictional, right? You could be a federal judge, you could be a judge within a municipality.
Political affiliation.
You, probably more relevant now than ever. Hopefully, decades ago, maybe it wasn't as
It's mental model.
his or her mental model. Time, right? So you could be appointed for life. You could be elected to a term, right?
I mean, do like our own personal egos, biases,
Sure, absolutely.
There's
So-
wonders, like for their like who gave money to their campaign.
Who gave money to the loyalties? So, right, you see there's these different boundaries, right, that the judge is operating within. Where does a judge get their authority? From the Constitution. Could be from the people, right, if they're elected.
Some of them from the social norms.
From the social norms. Could be appointed by an elected official, right? So they have conferred authority upon them by being elected, by being appointed, by statute within the Constitution or some sort of framing document. The role itself is the role of the judge, right? They literally put on the robes, which is, when you think about it, a very bizarre and archaic thing. What are some of the specific tasks that a judge does? Like on a Monday. Judge, say a little more.
I mean, like, make judgments, like, make decisions that are impacting people's lives.
Yep.
Listen to evidence and compare against the law.
Yep. They're listening. They're doing hearings.
Hear data without hearing the story behind it.
Very much. Other tasks. Right there. What's that?
Lots of paperwork.
Lots of paperwork.
I think that part of the task is to interpret the law based on certain something like research and interpreting how this plays out based on this situation.
Right. So the task part, you're trying to get to the minutia, right? When you think about all of the various tasks that make up a role, it's helpful to think about what are those specific things, right? Like hearing cases, making rulings, working with jurors, right? These are like the everyday kinds of things. The role is the judge. The authority is conferred from somewhere. And the boundaries could be time, they could be space, they could be geography. So your task is to get in some new groups. And I'll let you self-organize. I think maybe do groups of 3 now. And so thinking about the role of a school board member, what is the bar? What are some of the boundaries within which a school board member operates? From where does a school board member get their authority? What are some of the tasks of the school board member? So take like 10 minutes, you can grab flip chart paper and go to different parts of the room and literally chart your bar. Groups of 3. Ideally some new groups. I heard y'all like to mix it up.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay.
I think you're right. Right.
Sounds good.
Here's the group.
Ready, roll, pass.
Where's another group? Here's a group.
2 minutes before.
We already do it. We need to.
Another group.
We have two, so we should put it on the wall.
Another group.
We're here. I like that, we're already in group. You wanna be in there? Sure. How many does it say?
All right, so groups of 2 or 3. I think we've had some people running the bathroom and stuff, so they'll be back. I'm gonna have you come back at 11:15.
We need the assignment again.
So
Here, chart your bar for a school board member.
What's the bar of a school board member? What are the boundaries for a school board member? Where do you get authority? What are the tasks?
What power do you not have?
Right?
I think Elisa has some specific thoughts.
So boundaries.
The authority comes from in state law.
So the same thing we just
I
did.
think, I think. So what is this?
In the chief, well, our boundary, a goal, responsibility.
But I think it's student achievement. It's not, it's actually. But, see, it's not, I mean,
That's the task, isn't it?
So what was the first question he asked when we were talking?
Join either groups. A couple people are. Okay.
when you ask them about judgment, like your relationship with this, is it about what you do? It's group to the authority.
Yeah, it's really kind of nice. I might need remedial.
The authority, personal authority is how you execute. I don't feel like there is authority. I think it is the governance of the policy, so I think it is like holding, because if the administration isn't accountable to seeing change based on the policy, then you do have the authority to get another superintendent, get another, like that is. The boundaries that you don't actually implement the student achievement.
So it's governance, not management.
Right, you don't manage
Well,
student
it says
achievement outcomes.
resource, role, and responsibilities of the container that holds task. Yeah, governing, not managing.
Not managing the
For
student
sure,
achievement.
that's a good one.
Yeah.
But I think there's also the right to do, our authority comes from the public, because they elected us, or would have elected us.
Right, but I think that's why this whole idea of the authority to hold the administration accountable for the policy is set.
That impacts student achievement.
Right, but it's not managing the, it's not managing the.
Resources, things relate to the container that holds the task.
But did we ever talk about that as part of?
That is a separate.
Okay.
So set priorities.
We try to part.
Yeah, although he got a lot more out of it than we did, so I'm still thinking he's more.
Goals are set, fine.
So what is, so he has like,
Or is it, you could have goals and then priorities to achieve them? Priorities and then you set the goals to get to the, it's kind of like, you can do both, it can be two things.
That seems a little bit convoluted,
Yeah.
but,
Which is why I like
get
that
where
multiple
you,
years.
yeah, I get what you're trying to do.
If you're talking about priority areas, this is something that I want to accomplish. I would say that you're almost making it synonymous with goals. If you use goals terminology, you're having to do it as these are the order in which, if I have two of them in conflict, which one am I going to focus on?
Or we could have priority goals and then goal priorities.
Okay, let me give you an example and see if I'm like following you, like picking up what you're laying down. So let's go with the graduation rate. So let's say one of our goals for CPS is to bridge the gap between demographics, so African Americans and the whites. So we're going to try to bridge that or decrease that gap by some. That would be a goal. We're going to decrease the graduation rate between these two groups by a percentage, and that would be a goal. So then how do we do that? So then we're gonna look at all the different programs that are implemented. So you can look at the preschool promise, that's gonna be foundational. And then we're gonna look at what's happening within those schools, you know, that One Child Initiative to help support all these other the programs that are already sort of in place. So I think the overarching priority or that's the one of the goals. So then the priorities within the rest of these programs is ensuring, monitoring that they are effective and actually doing what they're supposed to be doing.
I would frame that slightly differently. Maybe the goal is to decrease the gap. Your objectives are three different things that you're going to measure a bunch of different ways, and then you would say which ones of these am I going to do first?
Yes, you're going to have your goals and then your objectives, and then all the other.
So maybe because there was and you know what's so sad is why do we have that? Why are these not a super yes? You know what I mean?
Like you would even just write it out because it's like
so stay where you are, but let's bring it back to full group. What are the boundaries for school board members?
They're bound by the school district.
Bound by the district geography itself?
So they're bound by like the laws and like what do we say, the policies that they create, the laws, like the Sunshine Law, that govern them.
Other boundaries?
Budget.
Budget. Budget. So the geographic boundary, jurisdictional bound, budget, the law, and different sort of statutes, right? There are terms.
Protocol.
What about for school board members? Where does authority come from?
The public.
The public.
We said the taxpayer dollars and the taxpayer.
But we have a question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, yes.
So our question is, for those people, so for those communities around them that are mostly renters, are they still accountable to them if those renters in turn are also maybe not parents and they're not accountable to them as parents? Are they still accountable to those communities?
Group. What do you think?
Yes?
Yes. I mean, it should be.
Yeah,
Right.
should be. You know, are they? But are they?
I guess my question is, are they accountable to the taxpayer or are they accountable to the children?
I think that
Because the children are taxpayers. If you take away accountability from the children and give it to the taxpayers, then the children have a voice.
right, but I think that that's real though. I think that we've seen these things play out, which is why we're talking about it, because like, they're not saying, like, oh, look, the kids, they're saying like, we want these taxpayers to buy homes in Cincinnati, whether they have children or not, so that we can have money in our school district. And I think that that's a valid point when you look at the communities and you look at the neighborhoods where there are schools where there may be a lot more renters. What does accountability look like to those, members of the community who don't have the power to vote? But those children are going here. So we had a whole conversation about that.
And the right answer is.
So yeah, this is interesting because it's something we've talked about, right? So Eileen Cooper Reed is one of the mentors for School Board School, but she's just been a mentor of mine. She's been here forever. Yes, like she is a mentor for so many of us. But when I would say things like, you know, I'm accountable to 34,000 kids, because how many there were in the district when I started,
here than there.
So just to take a stab at it, because I've thought about that a lot too, like, with, you know, they talk about, oh, well, it's our property taxes. But what about the renters? They don't pay property taxes. Well, not directly, but your landlord does from your rent. And so it's on the school board to keep the district thriving, to get that academic success, to increase the economic growth, so that each of our communities, you know, like you can charge whatever rent and get more property taxes to go to the schools. So that's something I want to unpack further, because I think I'm making it too. What am I trying to say here? Like that's too short an explanation. And that's
I think that ignores the dynamics between owning and renting. That's all I'm saying. So I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
I'm not understanding, I'm sorry. So what do you think the dynamics are when you rent versus you own? Because I would have said, well, for a taxpayer, regardless, so I'm not even tracking with the distinction. I mean, I know what it is, obviously, but I don't know why it would not be absolutely the same.
Get a couple hands.
Yeah. Okay.
So the dollars for the district largely come from property taxes, right? So that's part of where this comes in. Your income taxes don't directly go to that, right? And there's a whole complex funding thing there, right? So I think there's two different things I think that are in conflict, kind of with what you're trying to tackle, right? So you've got who you're accountable to, and I mean, my personal belief is we're accountable to the children, right? To make sure that the children are educated, right? The parents and the community members and the property taxpayers and all those folks are interested parties, but ultimately we're accountable to make sure that the children get educated, right? Now, that's a whole different question from who do you have to make happy so you can get elected or get elected again? And that gets to, you know, the special interest groups, the people with money that you pay for advertising, the property tax owners that may be pissed off that they don't think we're spending the money right. I don't know if that's
Well, my
addressing.
problem with that, like, I hear what you're saying, but it's easy to be accountable to a demographic that doesn't hold power, to power over you directly. And so when we start talking about we're accountable to the children, then that means like nothing, because like she said that there were board members who didn't even believe that student achievement was their goal. So like we can say that we're accountable to the children, we can tell the children that we're accountable to the children, but if there is no one who has power to enforce or to address when you are not being accountable, then I don't believe that there's accountability.
And I think,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that what we're talking about is a system that is designed to do exactly what it's doing. And we're all like, this isn't the way it's supposed to be built. Like, that's, like, I wanna know too, like, what does that accountability look like? And to like, drive it down to a very specific situation, I'm gonna talk about my kids, as my parents do. But my daughter has gone to school board meetings twice now and spoken, and she has yet to get a response. And it was a month apart school board meetings that she's gone, because you know when the public go and speak, they don't speak back to you, they just go. Which is a really weird system in and of itself. And she's asked for written responses and she's got nothing. So like there's a child who's trying to hold them accountable and isn't hearing a response.
She's
but,
not alone.
so what I was
I
gonna
know,
say
exactly.
about Madeline, who's like my little friend, is a lot of this, and not to oversimplify it, it does come down to budget, right? And what it impacts budget isn't just like taxpayers, it's property owners who have a certain kind of power to influence. So it's not, it's like, oh, we have power, it's like accountability, it's the relationship between accountability and power.
That's right.
And if I can leverage my property dollars, and then I've been interested in like, what would it mean to see a map of who owns property in Cincinnati, and then to like map that against like the kinds of decisions that are being made.
Absolutely. The way they're using their power.
Right. So, which is why I think this renter thing is super an important point of analysis.
So one quick thing too is, because I think I would agree in theory with what David was saying, right? That in theory, the kids should be who we're most accountable to.
I agree.
But I think to what Colin started our day saying is our systems are set up to produce exactly the results we're given. If we think about the example of Detroit, where kids sued the Detroit public school system because they couldn't read,
That was interesting.
And the result of that
Okay.
was they lost that lawsuit. That they had no right to learn how to read.
Exactly.
Right? And so again, our system, both that school system and our judicial system, were set up because of who was in power, that they were not actually accountable to academic results for kids. And so I think part of this session here today is, right, this is how our system is set up, but we also know that one of the reasons why you may potentially run for board is because if our system is broken, then you change it. One way you change it is by getting inside of it, right? We also know there's lots of ways to push for change from the outside of that system too. But our system is not currently set up for our kids to be able to hold us
But in
accountable.
order to win, it goes back to power.
Yeah.
And like
And
the way
money.
that like people with power influence votes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think what most excites me about potentially some prospect at some future point in being involved in school board is actually activating our citizens more.
Yes.
So that their voices are part of that power. Like they may not have the economic power, but I think collectively they can put people in office who are gonna best
Yep.
make sure that their kids are getting well.
And ask the question.
And I don't feel like that's what's necessarily happening now.
An association of people who are renting, like, this is our neighborhood school, whether we have kids or not, we wanna hold you accountable, like, do that. Go and do that, like, that's your power to do that.
And I think we've heard a couple times about intersectionality. I know you all brought this up, Colin called it out again, because Tim, I want to hear your question too about property renting versus owning. I think it's interesting to learn that like Bond Hill has one of the highest rates of home ownership and college graduates in the entire city. But then if you look at Bond Hill Elementary School, their kids are not performing at the same level. So we can all probably make some conclusions about intersectionality there too, about what's happening and who holds power and who doesn't. Like it doesn't just come down to who's renting and who's owning. Because of all the different structures of power that are in place.
So today, one I just want to name is fast, right?
Sorry.
Because, well, no. So what I'm trying to do is give you all frames that you can come back to think about how you shift systems. And so, one, I just want to name this is fast. Two, there is great power in a fuzzy BART. Right? So if people are not clear on your BART, or people aren't clear on the BART of a public body, there is great power in ambiguity because it allows you to skirt that accountability. So one of the things to think about, right, is if people literally in this room can't identify to whom the board is accountable, that probably means the board, as currently designed, is getting off the hook, right? So just think about this is a frame that you don't have to use all the jargon in, right? But if you notice when people can't describe their role, or when there's like a slippery, it probably means somebody's hiding something, or doing something where they don't want to necessarily be held accountable. So use this as a lens to look through, because if you're really going to shift systems, you're going to have to know who's ultimately accountable for different aspects of the work, and they're going to have to know it, you're going to have to know it to be able to get the change. The other thing I wanted to say about this is, so in the theory of it, right, where real work happens is actually when there's overlap between authority role and task. Right? So have you ever been assigned a task that you don't have authority to do? Real tough. Right? Other times you'll see people try to play a role to do something that is not actually part of their role. What happens if the judge comes to your dinner table and sentences you? It doesn't go great. It doesn't go great, right? So really, like, where real work happens in systems change is when authority, role, and task actually line up. And so one of the things that you can be doing from a governance perspective is making sure that people are clarifying the contributions that they need to make to systems change and holding them accountable for that. So you all, I think, are also getting into the piece that we're going to take a quick break because I think lunch is here and I want to get people fed. But basically for the next hour, you're going to essentially have a chance to think about political mapping. So that in the context of you've done some factor analysis, right? So I want you to think about, given this conversation about role, what's maybe a factor that you think you could address as a school board member, right? One that's in this kind of a sweet spot where you have the role, the authority, and the task to do that. So over the lunch break, we'll just take like 10 minutes, just grab lunch, and we'll be working on it. But be thinking about what's a factor that you think you would really want to impact based on the role that you could play as a school board member. Sound good? Looks like lunch is down here to the right.
Yes. So just, so I know you guys probably interpret this from what Colin just said, but thinking about what you just learned from Rick and Mary last week, about like what is actually the job of a school board member, what is it that you think you could impact? All right, so we'll take a minute to all grab.
Tables. I want you to think about what's one of those key factors when you were thinking about the work that you might take on. What's one of those factors that fits in the authority of a school board? Right? It could be something directly related to governance of the district. Could be thinking about something that's like leveraging, like we need to work more intentionally with housing or with transportation, right? But take like 5 minutes and at your tables, identify one of those key factors that you think you could impact and is within the authority of a school board member.
What tasks are within the authority of the school?
That's a trick question.
Think about the stuff that we talked about with Mary and Rick. Like, what do you actually do as a board member?
I think a lot more about this relationship between making the policy and holding the people that manage the policy. And I think that is where you two set up the policy. Because if you outline the policy and the administration can execute it, there's a problem that you have the ability to make different decisions. And that goes from the superintendent to that.
Yeah, because if they're, when they're implementing the policy with programming and curriculum instruction, and you're not seeing results, there has to be an evaluation and accountability out to the administration like this. We're not seeing the results, or like the diligence that we're giving you the evaluation, this isn't working. So there has to be, you don't tell them what to do, but there has to be some reworking of how they're doing.
So almost checkpoints, like, these things aren't going to turn around immediately, but I was thinking about the equity policy. And I was like, there's not even a metric for how we hold people accountable for how that's working out. Like, does your staff know what it means? Like, do you as an administrator know what it means? And so it's great. It's great. It's like, how do we know? And that's the frustration because a board member can work really hard to see.
And how is your structure record? So now, also equity in the sense of education as a whole, not just the first component, which is part of it, but also looking at like what are you doing in the classroom as an educator, as a principal in your school, that you're making equitable decisions in the type of structure.
I'm just trying to think of implementation.
I think the floor would be some sort of
So that mental model is there are not qualified black teachers that are willing to
something
work.
that the public would see, or
And that's a mental model we have to change.
or just internally.
What are the barriers? We're not seeing it.
I don't understand the committees, and I don't understand how that.
I know that there are black teachers.
I know we haven't gotten to that.
Special HBCUs, like, those are
I mean, I'm watching those school board meetings,
all the people who are working in prison school.
Angry is not good.
It's, so what is happening that we are
you know,
losing
it's,
this talent
they're
instead
just
of
dealing with
assuming
things that just seem so far removed from
Wasn't there. Finding
student
those
achievement.
for those jobs.
We have a
chart that, you know, they've got the internal auditor and the sheet primary. I mean, I think that's all just like the financial side of it.
Right.
Yes.
It would be nice
Yeah, so
to
yeah,
have the
I agree
internal
with
auditor
Allison.
that did,
Yes.
you know, for accountability for are we actually implementing
Well, the
these
superintendent's supposed to
policies?
be doing, I would imagine it's.
But,
But I don't know if that's, I mean, I don't know if that's.
I mean,
Like, if
yeah,
we can have
yeah.
an auditor for budget, can we not have
Yeah.
an aligned auditor who's looking at
Yeah.
policy and creating systems for management? Okay, we've done
So there are
policy.
Like, almost like there needs to be
In
position, you know, like committee for accountability.
I love it.
No, I
Yeah,
absolutely.
because they have an audit committee, but that's also just for the financial.
But I mean, after last time, I actually came away feeling sorry for Mary.
That's made up of board members
No.
to hold the board accountable, or
No,
hold the
an
superintendent.
accountability officer.
I think there needs, I don't even know if the committee, I don't know where it needs to be. Sometimes, I know what you're saying, but yeah, there needs to be someone who is.
It's like policy. All right, take about one more minute, try to lock in on a change that you wanna make.
I don't know whether you work inside the system or outside the system. I'm still confused.
Sometimes I just like, I really live in the house with all the kids. Our conversations we have with them, I'm like, yeah, you're black, you're going places.
Yeah, the kids are cool. I love my kids too.
I love them, I love them.
Oh, so.
You say miss teaching? There's just something about it.
They're easier to work with.
I lead the office.
Aren't they?
And I tutor.
But they are so funny.
I do.
It's okay, this is so
I love her love. Like she was at, just saw her again at the district LSB and school meeting this spring, and we ended up being in this small group together. She's like, so I was like, oh, it was great. And then just the topics we were talking about.
All right, so let's check in real quick. Do people have a change in mind, either whole group or at least for themselves? Something in the authority of a school board member? Yes. Okay. See some nodding heads.
Some deep contemplation.
Deep contemplation. Think about that second plate.
I didn't fully understand what you were going for.
So you did factor analysis.
Yes.
You did some role analysis.
Yes.
Thinking about what's a factor that you could impact in role.
Okay.
So just try to hold one in your mind. So I'm going to give a quick example of this really complicated tool I put in front of you that looks sort of like a spider web. It's just literally a spider web basically. But the way we use this is, so I was involved a little bit early on in the preschool promise. So we use the example of preschool promise. So when we were thinking about the political work around the preschool promise, right, the result that we were really thinking about was increasing the number and quality of pre-K slots, specifically thinking about like how we're going to eliminate disparities in kindergarten readiness and school readiness. So that was like a result that we had in mind for this change. So if you think about the change that you want, you can literally just write it in the center of your results at center. From there, what we thought was, all right, let's do, so a lot of times people do like stakeholder analysis in the sense of like who already shows up to meetings, right? Like if we're gonna do a school readiness meeting, like who are all the people that you come? And people list off a whole bunch of names, right? And generally, it's not the most strategic process. So what I want you to think about is for the change that you have in mind, what would be like, you use the language of sectors or departments, but what would be the different types of individuals that you would have to engage? So if you think about these as like eye wedges, like one for the preschool promise, one of the wedges might be philanthropy. One of the wedges might be parents and families. One might be the faith community. And then you can think about who are specific individuals that we would actually need to make that change, right? So Pastor Tate, he was pretty close to the result. He was working for it, right? So we might have him pretty close in here. There might be other leaders that we probably need to get engaged, but they're not gonna roll up their sleeves and help us make the change. We might map them further out. When we think about K-12, right? You know, Mary Ronan was maybe somewhere in the middle here, right? But some of the folks like Cheryl Broadnax or others that were working more on like the implementation side of the school district, we might map them further in. And the trick here is you're not just like doing a y'all call. You're trying to think strategically, if I'm gonna get the change that I want, who would I have to engage? And how close are they to the change that I'm trying to make? So take like 10 minutes. Again, this isn't gonna be an exhaustive analysis, but just to get a sense of the tool, think about what would be some of the key sectors or departments that you'd have to engage, and who would be some of the specific individuals within that area that you need to have a part of your change effort. And you can do this individually, you can do this in area groups, however you want to take this.
And not that this probably isn't already super obvious, but like when you looked over the effective boards, right, they build coalitions. So this is one of the reasons we're doing this. You're never going to get it done as one board member. What coalitions need to build to get big work done?
It's like powering down.
I mean, if you're doing it,
Just
you
after
can
lunch,
just
right?
use one sheet, you don't have to all.
So what do we want?
But you have one too, right?
I'm all for yours. Mine was like somewhat tongue in cheek.
Okay, so mine was to have the demographics of the teaching staff and the school staff reflect the demographics of the communities.
Who has a stake?
Okay, so you say human resources. So should we put the district here, or should we put other schools here, or should we put parts of the
The existing ones, so that we can all do the same.
So the district,
When I look at
HR,
parents and family, that's the community.
PD.
And also we can do the separate
One.
for. So that's one. And citizens.
Parents.
Citizens.
Do you want to put community members with parents?
I see the community, but I know it's a business community.
Because they have different goals.
Where's that?
To the left.
Is that, can you say what the, is that
It's a,
B12, B2?
Universities.
Business community. Oh. I shorthanded it. One for biz.
So it is there.
Someday I'll tell you the real story of how the business.
Sure. Cool.
When we did it,
Yeah.
taking action politically.
I would say city government.
We've been thinking about.
How do you shape what it looks like for each school, or, I don't know.
So the schools have the enrollment data.
Okay.
So they know
So-
that, and they know the same thing about the teachers and administrators. So
But I don't think it's that different.
Like,
If we
community
take that.
partners fall under members, or is that separate? Like, looking at, universities, yes, but there are other teacher education programs that might not be connected to universities, so do this become community partners or?
Or just the pipeline, like that.
The teacher ed pipeline.
Yeah. Like
So should we
universities
put
and partners.
So should we put
I would put that together. with
Yeah,
this.
maybe universities and teacher ed.
Because you're really trying to find something that comes from.
Yeah.
I would say your state school board, because or state government, because they define
To what degree,
teacher
and
qualifications.
actually, you know, it's having a lot about the role that LSDMCs play in this system. Right, because I think
I think so.
it's most of it's defined by contract, but then the board approves it.
But thinking even bigger than that.
Where does that,
Yeah, that's, where does the funding come from?
yeah.
Budget district is from, well, it's state, federal, and local dollars, and then the board sets that budget. So some of the dollars are earmarked for what they can use for.
Either or, I think individually, but then also seeing like where we align on the.
Did you upgrade to the new version?
Are we diving
Did you upgrade to
even
12?
deeper?
So yeah, so you got so your sectors, you got your pilot.
Yeah, we got our.
What flavor?
So now we need to give it flavor?
What's in the pilot? Like, and think about like how close are people to the actual change to make, right? So if you're talking about the superintendent,
Yeah.
they might be further out. If you're talking, well, you were talking about the demographic change for teachers, right? So the talent, I don't know what they call the role, but the talent and HR recruiter, right, is probably going to be much
It's probably
closer.
gonna be closer, so like the HR recruiter is saying.
That's what everyone does with the data, like, who knows what that.
They add that to like hires the teacher.
So maybe we split that and put like principals? I don't know.
Well, do the principals? Principals are involved in that close, right? 'Cause
They hire.
I was trying to hire
the principal hires the teachers.
private schools with higher teachers.
They do the interviewing, they make the recommendation.
Get hired and
Their
see.
assistant
So yes,
superintendent. So yeah, they're the first touch
And
point.
I thought how. So there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape in terms of like.
Obviously, the rep here on the teachers union, the main
Who are
rep
the,
for
what are
the
the,
district.
who are the players that could impact
And
the result that you want to achieve?
contract negotiation team is somewhere in the middle.
How close into the center, he was saying like, and he gave the example, Mary Roman was like closer in.
So I would put alum, like CPS alum, close, and then like seniors or junior, because why not have a pipette?
I mean,
Well, how involved do you think people are gonna be in hiring teachers for their school?
It's not about hiring them, it's about presenting themselves as like responsible teachers.
That's frustrating.
I feel like David, you're thinking a little bit like very task oriented to the actual hiring process. So if we can like take a step back and think about like people, not just like the line of hiring,
I think
those
that's
that are
considered
stakeholders
like what it
out
is.
here that are also impacting us.
I agree. I guess my question is,
I can stand here and say like,
do
this
they
is what
belong,
needs to happen, but since I'm not in it,
here, or do they belong?
I don't actually know how that's affected, like my perspective
Here,
or
because they have to
perception.
for their education.
They belong in
But they
both
might,
spots.
but they might have already had their education.
What she's talking about is like program, training within the system that begins that teacher.
But
So within the schools,
But how do
We do have like a part programs.
How do
Katie, who I
people
just had dinner with last night, she's the early childhood teacher for that.
begin to feel like they are,
So I think it's both.
like, I don't think
They might, may or may not.
Yeah. And I think when you're talking about universities, looking at their alum, their teacher programs, who's over their teacher, you know what I mean? Like, because I know, like, when I went to Mount St. Joe, and we were in their teacher program, they already had set up
To be like, I can
like,
confidently
in
say
Del
this is
High,
what
where you
we're
could go
going
and
to
do
change,
your,
this is what's
you know,
happening. And this is what needs to change based upon.
student teaching and practicum and all of that, but for CPS, they're like, oh, we don't have a lot of relationship with CPS, you know what I mean? So if CPS is, or if you have UC doing that directly, and Xavier doing that directly, and it's like, when you go, like, we're gonna make sure that you have a job here, that's gonna make it, like, especially your students of color, ties to it. I think that that's gonna be helpful, because then they're not out there, like, I have this degree, and I don't have anywhere to take it. That's kind of what I was thinking. But I understand where you're coming from, because you're like, how do we get this done? And I'm trying to figure out, like, how do we create more pools? Since one of the things is, we don't have these people, where are they?
I added curriculum writers, just thinking in
terms
to
of,
do
I was,
with
the
data. And I feel
part
like
of
they
the
had the
mindset that
opportunity
happens
to,
in teacher education
she
programs,
was in the
some of that may not be
community.
impacted by what we're teaching inside of teacher education.
To the curriculum for the program.
It's ridiculous. You're not thinking about it already.
So, when I'm
So if we talk about city government, you're gonna talk about demographics.
Well, I do, it's just not
Research.
within the private school. Right, I know.
Probably someone
I'm
else.
doing the exercise, which is frustrating.
Is Messier within the city? We're in the Messier, that's a recall.
Was this from a actual?
Yeah.
Say that again?
So it's, yeah, you wanna know what population growth, so you're aiming to where the demographics of school will be, and it is right now.
But I can't remember. I was
Maybe that's too broad.
Yes, you have to know when you start out.
I was thinking the
Part of it is
opposite.
how long does it take you to change that?
I just want to hold my.
We were gonna have a meeting to talk about this.
So that was my next. So that would be opposite. Then I would- And then I would.
City council members?
I feel like a city council member because, okay, so does the city give any type of financial anything to businesses that do people of color or something like that? Like, does the city give, like, is there anything that makes people want to do that? I know that I've heard that in other cities and stuff. Yeah, so like, what's the carrot to make people, to make the district want to do that? Can they get certain dollars or something like that? Like, is there an incentive?
And city council for ASAP.
Yeah,
That's a good question.
The funding doesn't come back.
Programming is supposed to be relevant, what I think they need. And assessing what the action is.
For resources, things like that. Then we've been very voted to DEI and studying the community, so I think there's stakeholders there. I'm gonna say DEI.
Okay, no, that's
I
fine.
mean, that's what I heard you say, so I'm just, it feels like we want to. Yeah. I don't really know where to put them.
So,
Somebody else wanna turn?
as you're thinking about this, map yourself. So where are you on this? And how close are you to it?
As a school board member or as a private citizen?
So I think for this, you would be using your role as school board member. Although you could map yourself twice and use your, or multiple times, depending on how many roles you left. You could be a parent, you could be a taxpayer, you could be a school board member all at the same time.
You know, we didn't say put.
In my head, it was, in my head, it was in this bucket.
I mean, yeah, it makes sense, but I think it's funny that we didn't even.
The thing is, setting policy, it's somewhere in here, but you're not involved in the implementation.
Okay, we that ourselves as school board members, but first, let's thinking about it.
Right.
I feel like for me personally, just because of what I do for work, I actually end up in all three of these. And I feel like I could be pretty close to.
Like the wedges. So I had, for preschool promise, I had philanthropic,
Is it
the pre-K education and early care system players.
to be
So that includes like
advocating
ODJFS and things like that?
Yeah, JFS, United Way, business community, elected officials. I had faith-based community, parents and families, and then K-12 school board, just as examples. So like K-12 systems,
Student, I would have,
like
like,
school systems.
I would have it grow from there, so like 11 seniors all the way down, so that kids from the beginning are saying.
There were many
"It's
more than
like
that.
being a teacher is something that you should do and want you to do, and like making that a part of it, you know.
So I don't know if this is where it belongs, but a lot of the work that Tess and I used to do together at Children's was that teacher pipeline from early childhood. But a big part of the problem is that we don't pay enough.
That's, I was just thinking
So
as we
that
said that,
comes
like,
from.
how do we get the
state
teachers in the classroom,
government.
they're now making $10 an hour to make it seem exciting. Like,
Yeah.
I go home and cry every night, I have to buy you my pencils.
Yeah.
You should do this.
They live in poverty, so it's like
Yeah.
we're saying
Yeah.
people come and do
Is
this there's
job
somebody-
where you're gonna leave
somebody left out of this that we need to bring into the conversation.
It's like
And
bigger than
maybe
this.
that's community members, and maybe we figure out if this is really what we want to do. What are the ways that we can incentivize teachers? Like how do we become a community around them and make people want to do this because it's going to be good for everybody? Like there was a study that said across race, if you had a teacher of color, you did better. Like all races. And so like how do we prove that to people to want to invest in incentivizing people to become teachers? Thinking that's important.
Second to last sheet of paper. I promise.
Oh man, I'm calling green umbrella.
So, holding that stakeholder analysis in mind. So, what did you hear was it last week? From Mary and Rick? What were some of the key insights or takeaways that you heard from them in their experience with board members?
You can't choose who's sitting next to you.
That's absolutely
Can't choose who you sit next to. Brother?
You probably don't want to be on school.
Real thought?
Right? Rick was like, are you sure? Yeah, like that literally was like,
I'm hearing my friend Vanessa White.
Barriers and challenges.
Barriers and challenges. So, political environment. So, school boards are kind of a crazy construct when you think about it, right? Like, so I don't know, there's 600 or so school districts, I think, in the state of Ohio. Each one of those with its own governing body, right? Elected, appointed, mayoral control, not mayoral control. I think the biggest thing I've seen, we work in 7 communities. Each of those communities might have 6, 7, 8 districts they're working with, and school boards are political, like hyper political, and not in the big P political sense, right? I mean, there is an element of like campaigns and elections and all that, but there's like drama. There's like real they should do reality shows on school boards, right? Like that should be a thing.
stop being polite and start being rude.
Yes, there it is.
The real world.
So just like this is like big P policy change, preschool promise, right? But you could imagine a small P like organizational policy change within the district, right? Or whatever change you're working on, it's going to be really political, right? And so when you're thinking politically, and you all had a chance to read about this in the Adaptive Leadership book, like there are often allies that you might find in your change efforts. There are adversaries, often, right? And the one that people sometimes don't think about is there can be casualties. So,
You
I want,
got to pause there.
yeah,
I need you to give me an example of that.
who might benefit from the status quo? Does that help?
Yeah.
So I had a superintendent in Seattle tell me, to get the change that we want, I need parents to sue me. Because that's going to give me enough cover to move the union on this issue. So in that case, the union might be a casualty. So this is where, like, if you're really thinking politically, there are going to be, so I used to work in transit, right? So there was a bizarre alliance, when I tell people this nationally, that the NAACP locally was allied with the Tea Party against the streetcar. People are like, the NAACP. So often, right, politics makes strange bedfellows.
I didn't know that we had an active NAACP party. Really? Oh, yeah.
So what I want you to think about is thinking about that change that you want, right? That result that you were thinking about just a minute ago. I gave you a worksheet. You don't have to do the whole worksheet, right? I'm just trying to introduce you to some different tools today. But think about like what's one of those stakeholders that you're thinking about that maybe it's a big ally, maybe they're a potential adversary, maybe they're a potential casualty. And there's some like priming headers on this worksheet, right? Things like if you really held them in like rose-colored glasses, what's that individual's like noblest value? what might be some of the loyalties that are, you know, like public, right? What are the things they might say they're loyal to? So I heard you all saying earlier, right? Are we accountable towards taxpayers, towards renters? People will probably say whatever they think the right answer is. There's another column here that says, what are the hidden alliances? Right? So who's really beholden to business or to the union or to the, right? And what you're trying to do is to think politically around, for the stakeholders that you're going to engage in your change, what are the ways that you can analyze how you may activate them towards the change that you want? And to do that, you're really going to do some analysis on what's their relationship to the issue, how can they really contribute, what do you think is their preferred outcome, what might be some of their loyalties, what might be hidden alliances. So just take like one or two folks and try to work them through this worksheet. And I swear I won't throw any more time.
Jasmine needs to like go home and rest tonight.
Change is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so
Well, let's do, I feel like let's do what we're studying, so let's think about the district.
okay.
And how about just doing some on the school board? Like a school board member, like not us personally.
Yeah.
Because you'd almost have to have each school board member,
Yeah,
because
but
they're
they
all
need-
doing it different.
Yeah, but they all have to make one decision ultimately.
If you're looking at one of the words, you have to know who's alive.
Yeah, but I don't think we have to get that specific.
Sure.
Just say like loyalties would be the people who are right.
But see, that's why I think that he's saying you don't have to say each one because each specific person has loyalties to something different, which is gonna affect how they vote. You know what I mean? So we could say the school board, and we could say the people who vote for you, but then we might be missing out on. So what if this is?
It's going to be to who's support, who lives to, yeah.
But can't we write that general here? Or do we want to?
Yeah, we can do it.
We would do that when we write the general report. We could do.
No, I got you.
I think the superintendent would be easier,
Okay.
because there's only one.
That's fine. Superintendent it is.
So relationship to issue, the superintendent is who ultimately approves the people who are being hired.
Well, no, the school board.
The school board has to approve the budget.
Yeah, the superintendent makes the recommendation to the teacher, the admin makes it to the school board, but superintendent makes it to the school.
For a teacher.
For a teacher?
And raises and everything has to be approved.
Yeah, at the meetings, like it's a huge binder, like all the salary changes.
Yeah, that's when we were doing Freedom School, all of people had to go through the board meeting and it took forever to get their money and stuff. Alright, so superintendent relationship to issue makes recommendations to school board, makes hiring recommendations to school board.
So it really has to define what it's saying.
Yeah.
Put the procedures for hiring, determination on monitoring, which are the overall. It's not
It's
just
overall,
racial.
it's not just racial.
Yeah.
But then I think it's also, they are in charge of implementing the policy.
That's what I was gonna say, yeah, they monitor it, but the school board are the ones who put it in place.
Right, the school board puts in the policy, administration puts in the procedure.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of a dual for the superintendent. Contribution to the result, well, that makes sense. What you're saying, their preferred outcome, I don't know.
They wanna meet the policy, they wanna match the policy that the school board has put out. They wanna make the school board happy, because that's the.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they want something
Is
that's
that
going
what they
to.
prefer, or is that gonna work? Like, I just look at,
If they wanna keep their job, it's preferred.
Yeah. I think that would be
Ultimately,
really good
to fix the student achievement, right?
It is to fix the achievement, but also, like, the board is their boss, but then they might get public backlash. You know, so.
And they might not always agree with the policy set by the board.
But then they have to have this-
Based
their
on that
contract.
policy.
Yeah, they can have their contract. Not-
That's true. she would be open to different options.
As a value.
Yeah, I like know those values, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think for her too, she also cares about being successful.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't need to be cheap.
Yeah.
You're open to that level of
No, necessarily. Yeah.
I think the other thing that I got from listening to her her keynote was that she wants like I think she kind of wants that Cincinnati CPS to be like the destination CPS, and so like if we're doing something new and sexy that has this new data behind it, that might be something that she holds dear because it's gonna set her out from.
It's gonna make her successful.
Yeah.
No, I hear you though. It's like, I don't want to, this will sound demeaning when you give it the picture. She wants to look good. Yeah, meeting those, being successful.
So, loyalties, our loyalties go to the board.
I think for specific superintendent analysis is to the children. And even on this,
Yeah.
she has her grandchildren, she's visited the system.
It says potential loss.
Don't you look good?
I know,
I was like, she looks good. I mean, can you turn this off? Alright, there's some troublemakers over here.
Could these, well, if you're thinking about, I wasn't thinking vulnerabilities, be like, where do you have something that you could use for leverage?
Something this person can use.
So an example.
Children's soft.
No, but like when we did Preschool Promise, we went to the business community and we said we have polling that shows that we get past this on the earnings tax with like 68% of voters approving. So if you want to get on board, that'd be great. If you don't, we'll pass it on the income tax, the earnings tax. Business community terrified of having anything to do with increasing income tax. So they said, we'll give you $1.5 million if you switch it to property tax. So their vulnerability was, we have enough community buy-in and ownership that we could do this and do this in a way that you don't want it to happen. So you can either get on board with the change or
Yeah, with the mom.
thinking politically.
Yep.
There are multiple sort of terrifying stories like that in the preschool process.
I think in any big change, right? Like I mean, obviously one of the ones we've talked about here before during my term was the change to from the magnet policy, right? So when you think about who's going to lose, lots of people who had an unearned privilege for decade plus, that could camp out or could pay someone to sit in their spot to camp out, we're going to now potentially lose that because it was now up to a lottery, up to chance.
There's a great quote, to those with privilege, equity feels like oppression.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
So Colin, are you gonna give us like a positive case study? 'Cause I could really use some good news.
Something that, we can do that.
Well, I think Preschool Promise in the end is a positive one, right? Like this is the kind of small p politics you have to navigate to get big work done, right? There are all of these different stakeholders who have all of these different, I don't know, pressures and hands in the pot, but like if you gotta get the big work done, it's, how do you navigate that?
The early grade reading work,
Yeah.
elementary initiative was a
Yeah.
great one back in the day.
Vision 2020 is another one.
Yeah, but I mean, it would be great to hear those, I mean, I know that it was a positive outcome, what I don't know is what happened with
Behind the scenes,
all
yeah.
of this. That would be, to tie that together for me would be really great.
Yeah. That's even, Eve Bolton used to joke with Mary Ronan all the time that Mary was the best politician in the city. And Mary would be like, oh, it's like the last thing she wants to be called. She's an educator at her core.
but to get her work done, she really was the best politician in the city. I would go with her, especially like during levy times, I would go with her a lot to different presentations, and you'd see her walk into a room, the business community, right, with like the business leaders from multi-billion-dollar international companies sit down at that table like another CEO and command that room. We would immediately leave that room and go to like a brunch of faith-based leaders, and how her message didn't change, but she knew how she was talking and who she was talking to changed. We would leave that and we would go to some kind of community event. And she was much more of the Mary that we saw, which is she's funny and she's warm and she's, you know, engaging, because that's what that is like. That's not being a politician, that's knowing your audience and how to talk to them all, but that is kind of what she was so good at, is what is the message that this person needs and how I deliver it matters.
Yeah.
Yes, you were so impressed.
Just stop this for a second. So we get back together.
I'm getting stuck in the last 2 hours. Like, I can get through it all with any given person who comes with, wrapping my mind around what potential loss means in the context of an individual or intelligence party.
I often think about status, power, right? Like if I'm a director of curriculum and for years I've been saying, I've got this way that we're gonna do it, right? And then when you actually open up the change to maybe a committee or peers, and people say, actually, you know, we've been deviating from that instructional model for 7 years. Part of what you're looking for in terms of the losses is like often deeply personal and related to, you know, people's competency, people's status within the system, people's reputation. Those are often things that show up as potential losses.
Maybe in the context of what our role would be, is that loss of voters, political backing, financial support, right?
If that's your player, it makes sense.
Yes. And you can think about this, you can always think about this as there's a frame around personal and system. So you can think about them as system losses, you can think about them as personal losses, you can think about them as losses someone might experience in their role. I did have a request, somebody asked me if, like, I will acknowledge, I tend to be very cynical and dark in the examples that I share. And I was jokingly earlier, so we do a lot of leadership programs with folks from all over the country that are trying to do this kind of work. And we do the emotional intelligence assessment with those folks, the EQI. And I was stunned in the first cohort that we did with, because when you looked across all the scores, the highest rated score across the cohort was social responsibility or civic responsibility, which made a lot of sense, right? These were like social change leaders. The lowest score was optimism. So I've really held that a lot for the last couple of years. So whenever I speak with our network, I talk a lot about urgency and optimism, and how do we have the urgency to make change and the optimism that change is possible. And so just this year, a quick example. So Tacoma, Washington. I don't know if y'all remember, but I think it was 2010 or 2009, Time magazine did that article about dropout factories. It was like a big, it became big sort of framing language across the country. And Tacoma was the district that they highlighted in the article about these schools that were essentially just, for lack of a better term, mass producing dropouts, right? So their graduation rate in 2010 was 55%. What? 55%. So imagine that, right? Every other kid, essentially, is falling out of the system. So we have a partnership there, a version of, so Strive Partnership is our local Cincinnati partnership. There's a group called Graduate Tacoma. So the school district hired this incredible superintendent, right? Amazing woman of color, powerful leader, but she was gonna make some shit happen, right? And so they pretty quickly realized, like, they were gonna have to be really political about how they gave her cover to make the changes that she needed to make. So the partnership, the sort of, I would say all of our partnerships that we work with kind of have a different flavor depending on the community. Some become like data consultants, some become community organizers. So Tacoma was very much the like community organizing model. So if you drive into Tacoma, there are graduate Tacoma yard signs in like every yard, right? And on the back of it, there's a website that says, here's how to enroll in our summer learning programs. And so they've just done like mass community mobilization. And then they worked really hard to basically keep the business community off the back of the superintendent. Meanwhile, she launched the Whole Child Initiative, which focused primarily on social emotional learning, right? Whole child development. They started to do, the state of Washington put some funding aside, so they started to do on-site pre-K. So 2017, 86% high school graduation. Right, so you're talking about 7 years. 30-something percentage point increase. They've also closed the gap, and African American males in Tacoma graduate at higher rates than white males.
What? Why are we not doing that today?
Right, so I just leave you with that to say that change is possible, and it's real, and these are, systems are made up of people, right? And so I know that systems thinking work can feel overwhelming sometimes, right? Because we're really, like, we're asking you to zoom out in a way that people don't really, it's not natural, it's not the way we train people, right? We train people to think about programs, to think about, you know, specific kids maybe. But change is possible and it's real, and so we set a goal 4 years ago as a national organization that we wanted 5 communities across the country to be improving 4 population level outcomes. So in a community, kindergarten readiness, early grade reading, middle grade math, high school graduation. This year we had 10 communities that were moving 4 population level outcomes. And so I've seen it, change is possible, it's real, you all can do this, and there's a critical role for school board members to do that. So I hope to come back in a year or 2 and be like celebrating the successes that you all.
Is that just a happy story? So what, I mean, talk about.
Well, I got a specific request for happy story.
I want to know about this business community that they had to get off the backs of somebody trying to force change. I mean, and it's not that I want to elevate like that, but I'm like, that's a real thing, right? And does that, is the business community necessarily an enemy of like real reform and change in education? Like, have there been any efforts to really shift the mindsets or the mental models of how the business community looks at this work?
Especially when you think about what CPS is currently doing, and we're pushing more partnerships with the business.
Is there an answer, right? Like, I think it depends on your community, right? Like, so Cincinnati is a super, the CDC runs Cincinnati, right? People don't say that.
But it's true.
We know that.
That's why I brought it up.
You said it, and we recorded it.
On camera.
You finish your discussion.
But I get the benefit of not working here, right? So it's easy for me to say that, right? Because I can say it, and then I like, you know, the people that pay me are in Tacoma.
Right.
But so that, you know, for however many years, 28 white guys ran the city, and some subset of them still do, and they've now created another group that's the RBC, right, which is 45. And P&G frankly cares more about Guangzhou right now than they care about Cincinnati.
Right.
Just real talk.
So they care more about.
Like Guangzhou, China, than they do about Cincinnati. I mean, they give them $1 million away a year, right? But part of what happened in Tacoma, right, was from like a really large macroeconomic standpoint, right? Tacoma's about as Midwest as you can find in the Pacific Northwest. You know, so as that industrial base is eroding, the business community also like lost some status, which I think opened up a lot of doors for the community to organize and share power in a different way. But I mean, we have like a theory of action that we use with communities, and we explicitly call out you have to redistribute power in communities to make systemic change.
Is she still there as a superintendent?
Just the way.
I also just want to add to that too, that I think like in any community, the community is a monolith. Right, and so like I worked very closely with the business of things because we needed to, right? Because they do hold a lot of power. But you'll also meet within that community lots of different viewpoints about what their role is, right? So like how GE operates is really interesting. The schools they partner with, they truly partner with. Like they went in saying, if one of our things at GE is that we want more diverse in terms of both race and gender, in terms of our engineers. Hello, we are in Cincinnati, right? What are we doing? And so like they started by partnering with one CPS school and saying, what could we do to help, instead of, which I think lots of partners do, coming in and saying, we're gonna do this thing for you. Aren't we awesome for doing this for you? Instead of saying, what do you need and what can we do? So that's interesting. And even within the CRBC, that's a very different field than the CBC. CRBC is the regional business community, because those folks are kind of like literally lots of them live here within the city limits in Cincinnati. And so when I sat down with those folks, it often felt much more like they wanted to learn from me what was actually happening. That's not obviously across the board though. So I think even within that community, there's a big difference. I will say though like our Vision 2020, those results, I could talk for hours on just that, and we actually wanted to end on time for once. So I'm not going to talk for hours on that, but I think again, there's like who's benefiting, who's not, blah, 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 all that stuff. And I also, there's this like tension between like urgency and like getting stuff done right at all times as well. Superintendent Mitchell, one of the things you'll hear her say over and over is think big, start small, scale fast. That's one of her sayings she's known for. She is a big thinker. But she's also very smart in terms of implementation. And so Vision 2020 1.0 was like, we're not going to start by doing this in all of our neighborhood schools. We're going to do it with a small subset of schools. And calling myself out on this, I will say, just kind of by the time we got to the place where it was, so we had made this assignment of what could we do, blah, 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 in our neighborhood schools. By the time we got to the place of like, this was going to happen, this Vision 2020 thing, and the administration had come to us and they had picked the schools and they were talking about how it was going to be rolled out. And I was like, whoa, have we engaged the community enough at these schools? Have we gotten their input? And one of the assistant superintendents, Bill Miles, said, we could wait a year and do much better community input on this. But we all in this room would have to be okay knowing that for another year, we're not providing those kids in all these schools with what we know is going to work better for them. And I was like, I'm done, right? Like, zip it, Lisa, don't talk anymore. They're absolutely right, go. And so there's always that tension of like urgency versus implementation with like more input, and like all of that stuff's kind of always going to be coming from all of those directions. And how do you balance it all to make the change? So we do want to hear from Colin a bit about his experience, and we do want to save some time for reflection, but I want to go over just a couple of, holy cow, this is
Hey, glamour shot, man, you like.
I know, right? They look good, that like,
Thank you, Knowledge Works Foundation.
That's not what you look like when you come off a red eye? Okay.
Yeah.
So as we know, October is like our busiest month, right? November, December, we have two things. October, we have like 100. So I want to just go over these quickly. So we are all going to be at the Wednesday, October 3rd board meeting. It's at the Ed Center. If you've never been to one of these board meetings, when you go, you'll check in. You can ask the security where they're held, but it's the big auditorium on kind of the right-hand side in the main hallway. So that's our board business meeting on the 3rd. We're going to also go to our board business meeting in the evening, one of the evening ones, and you can choose either the 8th or the 22nd. We have changed where we're going to do our debrief to Mecklenburg Gardens. It was just getting tricky, yes, because we might need a drink and not coffee. We were going to do Highland Coffee House. No, I'm just kidding. But it was, Highland Coffee House was tricky to get a reservation, and we're a big enough group, so we're going to do Mecklenburg Gardens afterwards. On the 4th, we have a great group coming in to do a panel for us. This one on the 4th about policy. On the 4th, we're going to start with a local lawyer who does education law is going to come in and for about 20 minutes or so, he's just going to talk about like what by law is the federal government, state, and local responsible for when it comes to education. So we just thought it was important before we heard from panelists that we kind of laid that out for you all. So he's gonna kind of come in and do that first. And then we've got a panel of folks who are local, state, and federal policymakers. In order to get questions to the moderator, if there are questions about policy that you have that you want to ask these folks, please send them to me by September 27th. And so what our moderator wants to see is kind of like, are 3 or 4 people sending me the same kind of question? Great, we better make sure we ask that. Of course, you can raise your hand during the thing too and ask questions, but that is so that we can kind of see what is the group thinking they want to know. After we hear about policy from the panel, we're going to go to a policy committee meeting and see how does the board talk about policy. So we'll go do that together, and then we know we've got our school visits. Yep. Yeah, yeah, and you can take a picture, and you know I always email this out too. So I'll email this all to you after today as well.
When we have the school visits, where do we meet?
We'll meet at Aiken High School.
Like, just a little.
Inside in the lobby at 8 a.m. If you get there a little earlier than, I know 8's already early, but if you get there a little earlier, that's great because we all have to check in on one machine and get our badges. And so to make sure we have time to go through that, if you get there a little earlier, that's great.
I did have the October 3rd, there's no, like, what time is that meeting?
The meeting starts at 11. I mean, they're usually hour and a half-ish. Yeah. So, all right. So anyone who has individual questions, we talk afterwards. I'll make sure we have time for Colin here too. So the one other logistics slide here, that's backwards. There we go. Complete your survey by Monday. Again, such a small sample size, so I really appreciate everybody doing them. So thank you. If you can get that done by Monday, again, I'll send it out, but it's the same link. One other quick thing I wanted to tell you that we're planning for is this thing we're right now calling the Impact Fair. Doesn't it sound exciting? So one of the things I've been hearing from folks kind of individually and I've been jumping on the phone with organizations that do kind of similar, not quite the same, but similar enough things to try to learn from them. So if we know our outcome in February is we want you all to know what impact you want to make and how you want to make it, right? We know you're either going to run for school board, or is there some other organization, group, something that you want to try to be a part of, volunteer at, be a board member at, etc. Then we thought it would be important to kind of bring some of those in and get you a chance to really sit down and meet with them. So towards the end of our time together in January, when you're really marinating in all of this and figuring it out, we're going to put together this impact fair. We've got a list of about 20 different organizations that might be interesting. I'm going to send out a survey to you all where you're just going to like say which ones are your kind of top 5. Based on what everybody's most interested in, I'll invite about a dozen organizations to come in, and it'll kind of be like a college fair setup. But it'll be just for School Board School for the first hour. The second hour, we'll open it up to the public. And how we're thinking of doing it so that you get some real time with folks is once we get that dozen organizations locked in, I'll send another survey out to you all. You'll rank your like top 5, and we'll have a time that first hour where you'll just sit down kind of one-on-one, or maybe 2 of you with one of them, and really talk about their organization, what needs they have, etc. So you can talk to like 4 or so organizations personally like that, with the goal that by the time we're done, you'll have some ideas of where you might want to go. We're also going to invite in campaign people and campaign organizations. So those will be on the list. So for those of you who are thinking of running, you can start meeting campaign managers, consulting people, etc. And those can be some of the people you spend time with. So that is all the stuff we have coming up. But I can stick around afterwards if anyone has other logistics. And of course, as always, I'll email it up.
Is your list of possible organizations already locked down?
Nope. Yeah, and it does include like CPS too, like CPS if you're interested in coaching or being on an LSDMC, like so we have quite a list. But if you have suggestions, feel free to send a couple my way. So we still do want to give you guys about 10 minutes of kind of reflection time, and we have about 15 minutes left here, a little under 15. So maybe if we took like 5 minutes or so, we told you a little about Colin's background, what he's been up to. If you have questions for him about like this stuff, like making an impact in Cincinnati, given what he's done and all, I'd love to just pepper Colin with personal questions about his professional trajectory. Look at all these.
Oh, geez. Fire away. I don't know who's first. I'm out of facilitator role now. Calvin.
So given that there is not a lot of optimism
So we do our own factor analysis. Like we literally use these tools internally so I oversee all of our work with communities. And our team, like we've been pulling, we work with all the communities, we have an assessment of all, and then one of the number one factors we see is staff burnout and retention. And so we've like even been thinking about, we were very fortunate, we received a $100 million investment last year from Steve Ballmer, who's the former CEO of Microsoft. And so we've been trying to be very strategic in how we like support self-care, how we're thinking about building talent pipelines. So we work a lot with, we can talk about like TFA nationally, Education Pioneers, AmeriCorps Vista, Public Allies, like how can we get people that have these really amazing skill sets into communities and also help people like manage, because it's like social work, right? Counseling, it's like this is some of the hardest work in the world, and it takes a huge emotional toll, and particularly for people of color working in race equity work that are bearing the burden of a lot of the work of teaching white people.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how, you sort of alluded to this, but how would you decide to approach a goal from the inside, start from the inside or the outside, or both?
I'm all about both. I think what would be really cool, honestly, I'm always full of ideas, but like if some of you were like, you know what, like this school board thing's for the birds, but like I want to go work on organizing outside of this, and I want to have allies inside the school board. Like that would be an amazing outcome from this group. But yeah, I mean, my perspective is it takes both, right? You have to have systems only change when there's ultimately demand for systems change.
I'm glad you said that. Earlier, you said when we were doing the data work, one of the things you said is that systems are set up to produce the results we already get. Then you end up with that lovely brochure of that,
Yeah.
right. Change is possible. Let me go back and say the statement you said before. Systems are set up to produce the results we already get. Cincinnati has been getting similar, it's the same, similar results. I've been here for a while. So if that is true, then I think I heard you say that Cincinnati's ran by CPC and CRBC, which goes back to the statement, systems are set up to produce the results we already get. Maybe I have ADHD, dysgraphia, so many of these things that all these children at CPS tend to have, obviously, after reading some internal documents. Maybe I'm missing something, because I'm wondering how the change can happen if this board and previous boards are quote unquote the system, failure definition. And we keep getting the same, similar, not the same, similar results.
Elisa knows I like to draw.
I'm not saying that we can't get that lovely brochure done here. Maybe I just can't visualize it in the same way.
So in your books, not to be like consulting jargon,
No, because I was looking through here because I had some things that I wanted to, even with these strategies, one in particular, design effective interventions. Just that in particular, and then I jumped to like, I can immobilize myself, right? I can do that. But what makes a tough decision, because then that's where I really got stuck. No matter what, it still goes back to systems are set up to produce the results we already get.
so there's this thing called the productive zone of disequilibrium, which sounds like the wonkiest thing in the world.
What's
but
it called?
It's called the productive zone of basically what this means,
Look, wait, I missed that.
so let me give you an example. Cincinnati 2001 race riots.
Mm-hmm.
Disequilibrium. So if you imagine this is like a thermometer in the community, to actually change systems, you have to turn up the heat. Now the trick is, if you turn it up too hot, people shut down. If you don't turn it up enough, people never make change. So when you think about things like the collaborative agreement, Success by Six, Strive Partnership, all of these things, in some way, shape, or form, I think you can, my belief is you can trace those back to race riots in Cincinnati in 2001. I'm not advocating, right, that you need to go out and create race riots. But what I'm saying is, Ferguson, Baltimore, all of these things, you actually have to change systems by turning up the heat on the people that are in those systems.
I totally agree, and what I found, when I read this and listening to you, there's a correlation there. But just like today, when you got Barbecue Becky and Coupon Carl, you know, all of these things, in certain communities, people have literally shut down.
Yeah.
So is it bad? No, it's horrific. It's horrific that I cannot trust my son, not because he is immature, but because people around him are looking at him as a threat. Just why? Because he's breathing, okay? So people have shut down. So it's already here. But if everyone in the system outward isn't listening or can't hear or can't feel it without a bomb threat or even the downtown shooting, it's like it never happened. It's no movement. So how do you get? I totally agree with that. Where I'm from, it's called innovative volatile change. I happen to call it that. I'm always disruptive. But you can't disturb something that can't move because people are numb. People are just set here. I mean, even black people, because it happens so much. People are dying. This is not, it's not dying, another murder, let's call it a murder. Even people here don't tell the truth no matter what. And that was the first thing I had to learn, is not tell the truth. I had to code. I had to say everything in a very coded way, so I didn't look like I was crazy. What? Your school system is illegal. You can't make people stand outside to go to school. School is free. No! Okay, I had to learn. I literally had to learn how to be very, very different. So people are numb. They already have a filtration system of what they're willing to hear. So I totally disagree. So how do we do that without a segment of people being in jail or dead?
I knew the answer to that. But I mean, just personally, right, from a person with a whole lot of privilege, I think it is going to take people like me that have accrued a lot of, I'm 36, I've had every opportunity in the world. I grew up in Indian Hill. My mom was a teacher, my dad was an engineer, right? You name it. I'm tall, right? CEO, like 67% of CEOs are like over 6 foot, like, right? You name it. I have blue eyes, right? But I think we've disproportionately put the burden on people of color for many years, decades, 400 years in the United States of America. I think personally that there is a role for, I don't like the term white ally. I introduced the term called
Co-conspirator, yeah.
right? So you gotta have risk, right? So I can say CBC runs the city in a different way than, Rosa Blackwell would choose, right? I am not gonna have, but I have to have risk.
So what is it gonna take for the people who are not understanding the benefit of turning the heat to turn the heat up on themselves? Because for me, that's where the disconnect comes from me. It's like people can identify themselves as allies and say, I'm gonna do this, I'm woke, I have these terms, like I'm gonna say white supremacy, try to explain to them why that happens and how they're, you know, how we're all complicit in it, like, it quite honestly is just exhausting. And so, what does that take? Like, what moves the needle on that? As a white man, like, I really want to hear your thoughts on that.
You know, I think it takes people like me to use the privilege to, I don't know, awaken others. I mean, so I've been facilitating a process down here over the Rhine with Free CDC, the city, the African American Chamber, Mortar, Over the Rhine Chamber, Findlay Market, where we just set a goal that they're gonna announce publicly in 2 weeks that 60% of all new storefronts over the Rhine will be Black-owned business.
That's radical.
Now,
I mean, I think it's great.
so, but I've been facilitating that process for 10 months, right? In my this has nothing to do with my former role, right? Now they're all freaking out, right? But what happened was we ran the numbers, and we said, what if we just tried to get to city demographics? So city demographics is like something like 50% white, 42% African American. So if we did 70% of all new storefronts for 13 years, we would finally get to over the Rhine having the representation of the city. So we showed that data to folks, right? Because I set up a container like this, we brought in data, disaggregated, we talked about factor analysis, we talked about mental models. But I think what I have learned is that there are specific skills and competencies that you can build in leaders, Black, white, otherwise, that help people to have these kinds of conversations in a way that you're trying to keep people in this productive zone to actually make the change. And so that's from my organizational role, I get strapped together. When I wake up every day thinking about the 10.5 million kids that we support, I'm thinking every day about how am I building in Memphis, in Albuquerque, in Phoenix, the leadership skills for frankly people in power to have a different conversation. And I'm not saying I figured it out because I will probably perpetuate a whole other set of disparities unintentionally, but I think people have to try and believe that you can.
And I do think this is like why you all are here and why you all excite me, right? Like when I was thinking about school board school, one of the things that Ellie Cooper-Reed, who I'm going to keep referring to because she's such a guru, like pushed me on was when I said it was going to be for people who were thinking about school board, like who were thinking they want to run for school board. She said, what if they're just thinking about school board? Not thinking about running. Like, I want them, yes, they're considering running, but they don't have to have decided to run. And there are two reasons why, right? One is because we'll lose women, because we know there's all that data, right, that women have to be asked and asked multiple times to run before they even consider it or raise their hand. So you'll lose women. And the other piece being, though, what she pushed me on is she's like, we know that to change a system, you need people inside the system who know what the problems are and the changes that need to happen. But we also have to have people outside of the system who know what the changes are that need to be made and how to make them, right? And so that's why, like, I know there's only 13 of you, but that's why you all give me hope, is because, like, this system, as we all know, I mean, last Friday, like, everyone left was like, oh my God, that's how the system really works, right? Like, and one of the things people kept saying was like, everybody needs to know that this is how you navigate this system. Right, okay, so we're only starting with 13 of you. But the more people that we have who understand how this school system works and understand what actual changes will make an impact, then you all deciding, I'm gonna run and I'm gonna make some changes from the inside, or like Colin was just saying, y'all are gonna be the agitators on the outside supporting the people on the inside, right, to make some of those changes. Like, that's how I believe change actually happens. And I do think, even when I think about Vision 2020, I just, like, a second ago came up here and, like, skipped over all the hard part to get to the story that I was trying to tell. But, like, one of the things was when we, as a board, said to our administration, this, like, bigger thing around, like, equity in our neighborhood schools and what would that actually look like, the first plan that they came back with was so, like, wah, wah. And it was so typical, like, of what you would get back. And I was pretty new to my role and shocked because I had been so impressed individually with each of the assistant superintendents I had met with how creative they are, how passionate they are, how dedicated they are. And so my question in the meeting was like, what if you had no constraints, right? Like, what if there was no state laws? What if you didn't have a board that you were worried about what we were gonna say? Like, what if there were no constraints? What would you come back to us with? And like, that's when they came back to us with an idea like that. And so some of it is like,
you know, how do you, if a system is set up to get exactly the results that it is, well then how do you change that system to get different results, right? And so that's basically what we were asking them, like how would you change our system of neighborhood schools so we don't keep getting the same results? And you think it's like a very like, quick and easy solution to something that's going to take forever to solve. And I know we like went right past the timing, but I think this session of all sessions, we probably need some real time to reflect on. You're welcome to stay here and do some of that reflection. And I do think one of the goals of this, like having your own vision for impact statement, is because as you're learning each of these sessions, that statement may be changing. Right?
It is.
So yeah. Yeah. So and
Absolutely.
And
I rewrite mine every time.
there you go. So I do think like taking some time, if you do have time later today while this is all still fresh in your brain, and just sitting with your journal with those reflection questions, and really thinking about everything you learned today, and like what does that mean for the impact you want to make and the seat you want to make it from, and like it sounds like all of you are giving yourselves the like freedom to say, this might be different than what I thought 5 hours ago when I woke up this morning, or this might have just totally reinforced for me that this thing has to happen, you know, and so either way it is actually fine. But I think we did want to close out on like some sort of nugget of inspiration that you want, like maybe each person tells us like one thing they're taking from today.
I would just be curious if you've got it, and I want to honor insurance here, but like, you know, is there one thing that you're taking away from the session today? Hopefully it's something aspirational, but it could just be like, you know what, fuck the system. I have terrible mouth.
I don't know. For me, it's something. I mean, I appreciate and value the role that white co-conspirators play in creating educational equity, but I also think in Cincinnati, I've also noticed a lot of class disparity among Black people, and the Blacks that are at the table making these decisions aren't talking to the ones that are poor and working classes. So, like, my commitment is growing along class lines, poor white people, poor Black people, like. And making sure that they're at tables and really activating a sense that they have agency and can make decisions. Because I feel like that's a piece that's been missing.
Marlena, you look like you're going to say something.
Well, no, it's really funny because I just yesterday was in my bank and had to sit down with one of the managers, and somehow we started talking about public education, and we were there for at least an hour until she's like, oh my God, I have to go on my lunch break. And I'm telling her about all these issues with funding, blah, 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 etc. And she was just, oh my God, why are we not doing something? I'm like, because people don't know. Oh my God, are you serious? And so it was just, you know, because I can say I'm going to run for school board all I want to, and I've come up with, and this is from both serving and former board members, have either said, that's awesome, good for you, or I walk into the room and they look at me like, and I love cussing too, they look at me like, who the fuck are you to do that? Like, well, I'm Marlena Dan Brookfield, is who I am, and I am a citizen, taxpayer, voter. My daughter's in your schools, and guess what? I'm watching you, and you have to listen.
Anything else that today has somebody thinking about, or thinking differently about, or going home to ponder?
Yeah. Well, today, going back to, I think, our values section, in there what I learned was language was so important. This, to me, sort of kind of bridges, builds upon language. And now that I have a child in public school, I personally believe what we do here, even what we learn, I cannot see a direct correlation between even where I want to make an impact, what we're learning, what the board does, student achievement, and when in school. See, like I see no correlation. I'm like, have you seen your mission, your goal? Do you know what you? And it all, when I think about it, it all comes down to language. And it made me check myself, you know, language. And it, I think, thank God I didn't have to declare that I was ready. But it does help me better identify where the impact is, because I think language and building coalitions, understanding who has authority or boundaries, and implementing change. I'm still figuring it out, but I'm getting closer.
Great, thank you. Yes, Heather.
I can't believe how I feel like I'm starting all over and I have no idea what my vision is.
Oh.
I mean, it feels okay though.
Okay.
Like, I'm okay with it, and I'm actually shocked by that too. Like, I still feel like I'm in the right place, and I'm learning the right things. But what I thought I came here for is not it.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
It's part of it, but it's not like my number one reason for sitting here right now. And I think in terms of like today, I have felt all the feelings. I mean, I could cry right now because that's what I do. But I felt sad, I felt pissed off, I felt excited, I felt motivated, I felt naive. I keep saying that because I do still feel a little
Yeah.
naive, but I guess that could also be hopeful.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Heather.
But yeah, it's the language and how we talk about it and what some of the
Frustrated, words.
Yeah.
No, I just said blah. It's my new word.
Anyone else? Yeah, please.
So, you know, I got up this morning and, you know, I was thinking about how life has just been nonstop with education stuff for the past 2 weeks. I mean, just off the chart. And how, you know, how much stuff is going on and, you know, all of it. And it's like, and you signed up for school board school to, you know, sort of like, you are crazy. But, you know, and I was thinking about all of my colleagues here, and I go, man, they are all crazy too, because they are all incredibly busy and they're really involved, and, you know, it was sort of like, in a good way, I mean crazy, but just, we're crazy. And after today, I'm thinking, thank goodness we're all a little crazy, because I think it's gonna come in handy.
I love it.
I find it, sorry, I find that really reassuring because I've already cried about it. I was like, I've got to take a breather. But I think it's, for me, it's, I'm young, and so it feels like the weight of all these problems now sits on, I don't know, not my shoulders per se, but on my shoulders. And it's just easier to be like, okay, that farm out in Mount Laurel that I want to buy, okay, I'm gonna go buy it today. I'm gonna go figure out my horses, and I'm gonna start growing. I'm just gonna take it easy because that's easy. So I think that's what it is. It's so much to chew and to digest and to think on. Because when you start learning and knowing it, then you are held accountable because now you know it. So what are you gonna do about it? So for me, that's where it's hard to swallow it all. And it's overwhelming is fun. I don't know. It's probably a word just for lack of a better word, but I don't know. It's just reassuring. I think it's reassuring.
So I'm overwhelmed, but I'm also thinking about one of the trainings that I have for my allies is how change happens. And so we talk about the change, you know, how you can go from activism to, you know, like community education, and you can get into advocacy, get into like those things. And so I think about that, but then I also look at that as a system, right? And so how do we, and so sometimes I feel like for my people, have had no shortage of people who were willing to literally lay down their lives to change and from the inside and outside these systems that were set up to break us down. And here we are 400 years out, and we are still dying in some very similar ways, and we are still fighting. And so, like, for me, a lot of what I've been thinking about in my career, in my life as a parent, whatever, is like this idea that Fania Davis talked about of like not fighting anymore, but like really imagining what you want to create, right? And so how do you, instead of fighting against what you don't want, create the things that you do want? And so what is my role in that creation? Is that creating a new system where my system that I create isn't held to that negativity? Or is that creating the community of people who are willing to say, like, this is how we want to build into people, whether they're going to be teachers or future administrators or even students. So for me, it's really thinking like, because I have a warrior spirit, like I am that person, I will not back down, but how do I preserve myself so that I'm not just one of those nameless faces that was fighting 400 years later and my great, my generation of whomever is still having to do the same thing. So that's difficult, that's a lot. And I feel like crying, but I also am like, at what point are we gonna make the change and recognize that we don't want the system to do these things anymore? And I think that we know that because systems have changed here, and we've seen that in America, but I'm also recognizing that when those systems are created, they made it very clear that there is no accountability except to the people who created them, and that's what I'm starting to see as well. So I have a lot going on in here, and that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, David.
I think something that today reinforced in me is there's lots and lots and lots of data and information, and we're all sitting here for 6 months absorbing all this information and understanding how it works. And most people view the school board as the only thing that's more throwaway than a judicial election, because Congress, president, even city council are sexy, and like people don't care about the school board, yet it's the most important thing, right? And I think part of the problem is people don't understand what the real problems are and how to distill all of this into a narrative that you can get into a 3-minute speech, right? Because people won't pay attention longer than that. They barely pay attention for the 3 minutes, right? Because people don't recognize what needs to change. You're changing the wrong thing.
Okay, yes. I guess I took away a lot of notes from things that people said. The systems are made of people kind of stuck with me because as in my other work with opioid and homelessness and things in my day job that we're looking at systems, it was enlightening to me that it also it's a people issue, even though you're representative of data. It's just and then kind of bridging the conversations and the language, raising up the voices like the renters who might not feel like they have the language, or what's the language to people who oppose what we're proposing, which we need to keep in mind. We all tend to agree and have the same worldview, but how to get that out to the broader community on the level of, your house isn't burning down, that kind of thing. So taking a lot of little nuggets from it. That's it.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah. I think I will just say that the weight of all of this work, I think I'm hearing from lots of folks, it can weigh on your soul, right? And just last night, not to bring like social media in, but I had posted to Facebook this quote, because what I posted was that I was feeling overwhelmed by the weight of what this world needed in terms of repair. And this was one of the reflections in our prayer book on Rosh Hashanah. And so we'll leave it up here in case it resonates with other people too, about like this whole idea of like, yes, that it's action oriented. We can't wait for a miracle. It's on us to do the work, but we do it step by step. right? And that, I think also this bottom part with Jasmine, to what you're speaking to, like the work's already begun. The work has been going on for generations before us too. So to be looking for the light when it feels so dark, to be lifting up each spark, and to be doing this work step by step. So I'm grateful to be doing it with each of you, and grateful that you all have chosen to do this work. So thank you, and I also want to thank Colin for all of his work. Yeah.
I would just say the one thing that makes me hopeful right now is I talk a lot. So I have a coach, this guy named Raj Chawla, and Raj, he's been working in Puerto Rico doing the facilitating the hurricane recovery effort, and he's a really interesting guy. But his thing is, what's happening at the federal level right now is tearing down a lot of systems, right? And for good or for bad, right? But frankly, some systems that haven't served us very well. And what makes me hopeful is I'm not like some seasoned veteran, but I've been doing national work now for 7 years and social change work for like 12. And the amount of communities that I see that are creating what they want and organizing locally to create new solutions gives me hope that when we are at a different point nationally around maybe getting some things done at the federal level, that we'll have amazing models locally that we can lift up to create new systems of hope. So thank you.
All right, thanks all. And we're going to be here for a while cleaning up, so if you do want to stay in this space to reflect, there's comfy couches, there's spots, but yes, we will see you all the next the board meeting on the 3rd. Let me get that on the